light mittens painting the sailors. It might even be an oil painting. They didn't sail in, they drove in. A few silly jokes played in my head. Panic set in, and then it became quiet, calm, and serene in my skull, like a graveyard. Words didn't string together into sentences. And even if she were asked to say anything but a baby hey, now nothing good would come out of her mouth. Such silence, unusual for a small apartment. Communal apartments usually have an insane amount of unnecessary sounds on the periphery, inside and out. She stood there for a couple more minutes until finally one conscious thought occurred to her. "Damn it," Jennifer muttered. Damn it, 2 stripes. Holy shit." Though Jennifer had never been prone to swearing or strong language. Of course, as one well-known American rapper, songwriter, and social activist saying, foul language is the jewel of the English language. And she was tolerant of swear words. She had nothing against them. Sometimes it was possible to use a strong word for the beauty of the syllable. What nonsense am I thinking of? Jennifer fought herself. I wish I didn't have to think about it. Talking to myself, too. Jennifer giggled, but immediately fell fearfully silent. Her laughter seemed to linger in the room for a while longer, getting on my nerves. But after a couple of seconds, she found herself in silence again. Jennifer Smith was 17 years old. More accurately, she had recently turned 1. She was a student at the Silicon Valley College of Technology. She was majoring in screenwriting. Tall for her age. Not tall, but tall. Typical for this age. Fragile build, flat chest, and narrow shoulders, little muscle mass. The classic skinny girl who has trouble gaining weight. Jennifer had never been particularly fond of her figure, but she thought she was generally quite pretty. She had good hair, blonde, natural, healthy. It was neatly cut in a cascade, golden like molten gold, a real treasure, and beautiful eyes, either light green or blue. Jennifer may not have considered herself exceptionally beautiful, but harmonious and foldable, for sure. She covered her eyes. It was probably a silly statement now, but she thought she was probably not stupid, persistent, and hardworking. Jennifer had liked to think so at first, and she just didn't have the energy. She had every reason to. She'd been born into a large family, was the second daughter and 4th child. But by the time she left her father's house, there were already 10 children in the Smith family. Her family lived in a small town, and they basically lived by 2 principles. Rich with what we have and live with what we get. And also the classic, don't start in this. Parents had their children's whole lives laid out from start to finish, and most obeyed. Jennifer's brothers and sisters quickly understood how to do and how not to do. There was no arguing, no one had an opinion, and the main thing was to obey and work for the good of the family, no matter how old-fashioned it sounded. Work, 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 work. When Jennifer announced she was leaving town to become a screenwriter, it was a huge scandal. "You won't get a dime from us," declared her father. Only work that is useful is necessary. Writing stupid scripts for stupid movies is a waste of time. That's what morons and clowns do. I'd rather do this entertainment and be a clown than kill myself and my health here, Jennifer said. Her mother, a thin, sickly woman, exhausted from hard work and uninterrupted labor, stood silently behind her father, who looked not so much angry as dumbfounded. None of the children, not even the older sons, were so bold as to defy him, to go against it, and his daughter's disobedience was throwing him off balance. "If you cross the threshold of this house now, you may not come back," the man said stiffly. "You won't have a home. You won't have a family. We will never help you, even if you beg." "Jennifer, Mommy," sob. "Please, daughter." For a second, Jennifer hesitated. So that's how it is. Was it worth giving up her life? A hard but understandable and logical and predictable life that didn't promise any traumatic twists and turns, to abandon it and go virtually nowhere like this, living in a hostel, working for a pittance, studying. At the same time, isn't she taking on too much? She is a simple girl who just turned 16. No, her mind stubbornly objected. The thought was like a slap in the face, something Jennifer had only thought about. This was her plan, her dream worth pursuing. She'd graduated 9th grade with honors, had done amazingly well on her college entrance exams, and deserved to make her dream a reality. No one is going to hand her what she wants on a silver platter. You have to work, you have to study, you have to labor. Gotta take risks. "I'm sorry," she muttered. Her father's face contorted. Her mother spasmodically exhaled in relief, but Jennifer only stubbornly clutched the strap of the backpack she'd left the house with. "But I have to do this." Her father didn't say anything more to her. Her mother wanted to say something, but her husband interrupted her with a look of his own. "She's made up her mind. Leave it." And Jennifer left her father's house. For a moment, it even seemed to her that her father involuntarily respected her for her firmness and determination. But he could never forgive her for it. Some of her older siblings contacted her during that year, but she never heard from her mother or father, already enrolled in the Silicon Valley College of Technology. She met 3 girls from the same school, but with different majors who also came from other cities. The 4 of them rented a fairly modest but conveniently located apartment. It had 3 small rooms, a living room, a kitchen, and a bathroom. Of course, without a dishwasher and a separate bathtub. And there was no elevator in the building, but one could hardly hope for luxurious conditions in her first apartment. Jennifer's room was tiny, but it had a window and a built-in closet. One wall was of rough brickwork. All in all, it was exactly what was needed. Not just her first adult accommodation, but a whole lot of personal space that she'd never had in the first place. 12 people lived in the village house. What kind of personal space could there be? Jennifer felt grown up, very grown up. No one helped her with money, of course. In fact, it was partly because of this that Jennifer found herself in this situation. Without much education, forced to go to school. She had only one way out, to get a job as a cleaner. Although no, a sanitation assistant. That's what her job title was. 2 of her 3 employers preferred to call her that. Jennifer had nothing against it. Her parents, with their patriarchal attitudes, were convinced that a girl had the right not to be able to scrub floors or do household chores in general, only if she was a boy. If not, she is obliged to be able to do everything that a woman should be able to do, and to do it perfectly. Therefore, the diligent young girl received good money for her work as a cleaner. Jennifer was lucky, and all 3 of her employers were very generous people, correctly assessing the efforts of the young worker. They made bonuses, increased bonuses, and in general, all sorts of financial encouragement. Now, her 3rd part-time job was the evening shift at Jolden McGee. Jennifer remembered that her first thought when she first went there in English was that the Russian name did not sound very presentable, and for some reason thought that she would not like it here and nothing good awaited her. But the employers promised to pay well for uncomplicated work. She worked 16 hours a week. The firm's office had its own cleaners on each floor, but they needed a separate cleaner to clean the 3 large conference rooms. Not only the floors, but also the furniture, tables, all surfaces, carpets. Fortunately, they always had specialty cleaners on hand. Perhaps the floor cleaners would have been fine with cleaning the halls themselves, but they were all already grandmothers in their 60s. They didn't have the dexterity or skill to wipe down the tall television screens or drape the long curtains. Jennifer did her job and didn't complain. Physical labor hadn't intimidated her since childhood. Jennifer wasn't sure what kind of company Jolden Age was. The firm seemed to specialize in finance, and at first Jennifer thought it was some sort of private bank or something similar. Then, after a couple of months on the job, she figured out that Jolden was a financial organization that provided various financial market services under license, extending credit, loans, selling securities, financial management, and any other money-related transaction. Jolden had 3 branches in different cities, all run by the same Smith family. Funny last name, Jennifer. That's probably why she remembered it. Nicholas and Alexandra Smith, the founders of the business, lived in another city, and had put this relatively new branch in the hands of their son Gregory. Jennifer had seen a glimpse of him working as a regular employee. He was a tall, good-looking guy with a straight nose, always wearing a shirt and dark brown hair with a boyish, cheerful smile. He joked around a lot, laughing loudly, attracting attention. Justin was a real soul of the company and everyone's favorite. And as Jennifer had heard, he was not a bad leader. His youth, of course, sometimes hindered him, but he was persistent and diligent. He and Justin crossed paths a couple times in the hallways. Most often after a meeting was over in the conference room where Jennifer had to clean up. Justin always nodded politely, saying hello. He was generally polite to employees. Jennifer responded in kind, and there were no particular interactions or problems. Jennifer quietly did her job, got her paycheck. When she crossed the threshold of the firm, everything was a thing of the past. Just like that, she came in to clean up after another meeting. She saw that the directors and other important people had already left the room. Jennifer didn't see Justin among them, but figured she'd just missed him leaving, picked up her tools, and headed into the hall. She hadn't expected to see anyone there. Jennifer flinched as the unexpected question rang out. "Are you having a hard time carrying all those supplies?" "Shit," Jennifer whispered, flinching and glancing unhappily at Justin. "Sorry, didn't mean to scare you." "I'm sorry, Justin," she said. "I thought everyone had already left." She fell awkwardly silent. Jennifer waited for him to leave, but Justin was apparently in no hurry to go anywhere. "Can I come back later?" he asked. "No work. I'll get some rest and then I'll go too," Justin sighed. Jennifer shrugged, tidied up her hair, put on her gloves. Justin sat on the windowsill and peered at her with the corner of his eye. Jennifer usually worked with headphones on, but now she considered it impolite and set to work in silence. "You never answered. Is it hard for you to carry all that stuff or not?" "I have a wheeled cart, so it's not heavy," Jennifer replied. Justin nodded silently. Jennifer was unfolding the ladder to wipe down the air conditioner, and for some reason she asked, "Rough day?" "Yeah, but no harder than usual," Justin sighed. "More like a hard week. Tough projects, deadlines." He shook his head. "You know how it is? Multiple deadlines at once." Apparently he figured Jennifer wouldn't know what he meant. But she grinned. "I had that when I worked at 2 restaurants in a row, a few banquets, and after cleaning one room, I'd run almost across town to clean the other, and then I'd write up notes." "Hee," Jennifer threw in. "God, what nonsense you're telling him. I don't think he's interested," but Justin nodded thoughtfully. He was now, appraisingly, looking at Jennifer, studying her with his gaze. Usually such looks made her tense. There were sometimes people in restaurants who gave her unpleasant, oily stares that made Jennifer Smith want to go back to her safe little village where everyone knew each other. But Justin's gaze was assessing, but not nasty. The guy looked the way one looks at a pretty girl one likes. "Can I talk to you?" Justin asked, looking openly at Jennifer. "I'm usually with all the employees, but I want to complain." "Of course you can," Jennifer smiled. "Then I can go you too." Waxon nodded and smiled absent-minded. "About the difficult week. My parents found me a bride." Jennifer hummed, checking to make sure she had thoroughly dusted off the air conditioner, and carefully reached down. "No offense to you, but I thought that sort of thing happened in the Middle Ages, and it's not uncommon now." Justin sighed, "Especially when it involves several $billion. Who should we marry?" "Go ahead, I'll do it." Jennifer laughed, and he laughed too, bitter about his situation. There was a lot of subjunctive mood here that history doesn't tolerate. What was meant was that it was incorrect to use phrases like "if Alexander the Great hadn't reached India" when evaluating historical processes, because history went the way it went, and everything else is baseless, out of speculation. If Jennifer hadn't come, if David hadn't dared to talk, he was probably just too alone. Someone had to listen to him and support him. Someone who had nothing to do with their business. Someone far removed from what rich people did to preserve and strengthen their business. David would have been ready to laugh himself. The comicality of the situation. He and marrying for convenience in the 21st century. But isn't it funny? Turns out it wasn't. It wasn't a joke, but a very real reality. A tautology, if you will. David would have laughed, but he wasn't really laughing, and the urge to talk was almost tearing him apart, was turning his bones. "I'm marrying the daughter of a major shareholder," he thought. "Isn't she good-looking?" Jennifer asked in a businesslike manner, and David noted her odd way of speaking, as if she was from this time or stupid herself. "She's very pretty and educated," he exhaled, looking down through the window. "Refined, graceful, loves the theater, always dresses well, and smells good." "Then I'm sorry, but I don't see much of a problem," Jennifer issued cynically, picking up chairs from the carpet and noting that it wasn't as stained today as it usually was. "Rich hottie, she understands, and she's probably not your favorite person. But I always thought it was easier for guys to come to terms with an imposed marriage than girls." She wasn't just saying this, she was speaking from experience. Her 2 older brothers married at their father's behest, and while little Jennifer watched their brides, who were whiter than chalk with excitement, she noted how calmly her brothers behaved. To them it was just a transaction that helped the family, brought new female workers into the family. The help for the mother was not the men going off to a strange family at the behest of a stranger. They weren't the ones painfully parting with their childhoods and having to be malleable, unyielding most of the time. So Jennifer, with her 16-year-old maximalism, thought it was a bit unseemly for men to complain about a marriage of convenience. David, however, looked puzzled. There she is, Miss Andrew in all her glory, he hummed without much amusement. He was silent for a moment, then shook his head. But, binding ourselves together in marriage without a desire for us isn't much fun either. But at least if there's any honor in it, I'm not the most highly moral or ethical person. But I don't want to offend my future wife with goings-on and cheating. My fiancée is not a bad person. Maybe a little cranky infantile, but she's smart, beautiful. What more do you need? And you're going to go out and cheat? Jennifer asked. David looked at her, and that was the most eloquent answer. Jennifer didn't know why, but at that moment she found it interesting. David lived in a world that was the exact opposite of her own world that she had escaped from. Her father would have called it debauchery and filth, and maybe he was, but it seemed free to Jennifer, much freer than the world she lived in. Or maybe the difference was their situation, their material wealth. But either way, the truth was that in that moment, both David and the world he existed in outside this room seemed tantalizingly alive and intriguing to Jennifer. As if catching her thoughts, David smiled mirthlessly. This may sound silly, but I haven't really gone out much yet. I want to live free without all these obligations. He looked at her defiantly. Jennifer wanted to answer him, but she didn't know what. So she shrugged her shoulders indifferently. Anyway, basically, she shouldn't have cared about David and his suffering, what they had to do with her, but seriously. But at the same time, she realized that there was no one to talk to him, and maybe mistakenly thought that even an interlocutor like her was better than no interlocutor at all. Talking through your problems was always easier than silently making them up on your own, going over them 100 times in your head. So explain to your parents that you want to go out more, Jennifer declared. And when David tried to interrupt her, she shook her head. A couple of her golden strands of hair fell over her face, and she blew them out of the way. Jennifer suddenly realized that it was very easy to just talk to David as if they had known each other for a long time. I mean, don't completely give up on the wedding or anything, but just ask him to postpone it a little and have fun. In a decent way. Jennifer shrugged awkwardly. You've probably got the image of family and all that going on there. And the image of family. Yeah, David agreed. Then his eyes suddenly gleamed with a strange fire. Would you happen to want to have some fun with me? He was 4 years older than her. Jennifer was 16, but she understood well what David was offering her. At first, the offer had angered her, and she had been quick to tell David that she wasn't an escort or an entertainment girl, and he could go far away with his offers. Her father would probably forgive her for such a speech and accept her back into the family. He had often said that men were inherently promiscuous and girls needed to guard against them and be firm. But David was probably partly promiscuous. However, Jennifer suddenly found that as a person he wasn't bad. Yes, a little spoiled, a little arrogant. But those are flaws. He is quite courteous, intelligent, educated. Jennifer quickly realized why he was so attached to her. Her mom liked to say that her daughter was good at feeling other people's hearts. And the family was even willing to make concessions and let her become a psychologist, a family therapist, preferably. It's so noble to keep families together. But Jennifer chose her own path, and things happened the way they did. But this skill or instinct of hers helped a lot in her relationship with David. She could see perfectly well that he had only become attached to her because she had been there for him, then in that hall. Jennifer listened to him, didn't judge him, gave him advice, and David wanted to prolong that feeling of togetherness in his defense too. He was polite, graceful, unobtrusive. There were no dirty innuendos, no dirty jokes or awkward moments. Just words were exchanged. David began to linger around her more, deliberately slow to leave the conference room. Chocolates, flowers, small gifts. Inexpensive ones because flashy gifts could make Jennifer tense, make her wary, small, dainty. He was neat and precise in his signs of attention. Some of his gifts were amusingly useful: a set of nice dishes, gift coupons to a store for inexpensive but nice clothes. He found out she was studying to be a screenwriter and gave her some very useful and interesting books. And Jennifer? Well, yeah, she gave in. She wanted to feel like a princess being courted by a prince. Living in the city had taken the shackles off her a bit, and she was taking herself and some of her questionable decisions more easily. Perhaps she had rushed into a closer relationship with David, but she suddenly wanted it so badly. She liked him, but to her further relief, she hadn't truly fallen in love with him. David hadn't promised her anything, and they both understood what was involved and why. They weren't expecting anything more than that. A pleasant companionship, a modicum of understanding, a slight liking, a friendship-like, pleasant, tender, sensual experience. Jennifer's first experience. She regretted nothing and was glad for the closeness with such a generally good man. Her parents had built all of this from scratch. David had told her on one of their evenings together. They had nothing in their childhood, only dreams and plans that have recently become reality. Our firm is young, not as established as everyone would like it. Your marriage to the daughter of a big partner gives you support. Jennifer guessed. David nodded. You're a good son too, Smith shrugged. Besides, you could use the money too. Trust someone who has almost none. You're right, he nodded. Money's important, but I care more about my parents' diligence. They know I'll do the right thing. That's why they turn a blind eye to my failures. Jennifer didn't know if their brief affair applied to blunders. She decided not to elaborate. Soon their adventure was going to be over. And David, as if feeling guilty about it, had given her a big parting gift for her birthday, tuition money, a sum she had immediately deposited with interest. Of course, the word immediately is an exaggeration. She tried to refess. I'm not a prostitute, after all, she muttered resentfully as David insisted on shoving the envelope at her. Don't buy me, I don't need anything. God, what's that got to do with it? David exhaled. I cashed out the account to give you a 17th birthday present. I expected you to be hesitant. You're self-confident, hard-working, uncompromising in some matters. Jennifer Smith represented a set of moral qualities. They didn't show up everywhere, but she was firm in her convictions. I'm not trying to buy you, just giving you a gift for a friend, David explained. Jennifer gave him a wary look from under her golden bangs, and he sighed heavily. Despite the ease of communication, he was getting lost right now. In the 4 months of intimacy, it was as if Jennifer had opened up a new facet of his soul. You've just been really helpful, he said. I know I'm not the guy you deserve. To put it bluntly, I'm nothing to you at all, but I felt so good with you. You made me feel better about myself, put things in perspective. Breathe a little easier. At this point, 20-year-old David Smith blushed, but Jennifer didn't laugh. He continued, At least we're friends. I want to give you a gift as a friend. Please accept it. It will make your life easier, as you have made mine. He gently placed the envelope in her hand. Jennifer took it. David smiled, kissed her cheek. Thank you for everything. 2 months after saying goodbye, it turned out that the parting gift was more than just money. Jennifer was pregnant. Oh my God, how awful, she thought. I'm 17 and I'm pregnant. My parents will get a kick out of such news. How could this be happening? For Jennifer, David was the first boyfriend. He always used protection and made sure there were no consequences. He even watched her for a while after they broke up. Jennifer stayed working in the office, but she and David rarely spoke now. He was completely preoccupied with the wedding preparations. Jennifer was glad that a good man like him was taking the fate of their relationship more lightly. There was no awkwardness between them if they bumped into each other in the hallways or David was late for work while Jennifer cleaned the conference room. He was unfailingly polite, even making a joke or two. But overall, their relationship was back to square one. Jennifer had no regrets. The past relationship was a warm memory. In addition, David, with his gift, really made her life easier, and she lived on. She was breathing easier after this affair, too. And now here it is, the baby is alive. What do we do? What to do now? Those two questions were swirling around in her head, and no ideas were coming together. As Jennifer stared dumbly at the test results, her brain seemed to cease to exist. The connection to the service was down. Jennifer was alternately overwhelmed by a creeping panic, then gripped by clammy fear, then nauseous with excitement. Then the range of emotions was enormous. Jennifer seemed to be experiencing something resembling a panic attack, but a couple minutes later, she was nearly shattered by hysterical laughter. That's Jennifer Smith, she said loudly. glad that her neighbors were all absent from the small apartment at this moment. Career. Regrets of a mother who gave birth at 15 and you're not that far along in years gone. She fell silent and felt the anxiety again, that nasty feeling stiffening every organ as if it were squeezing before pinching. And overall, Jennifer felt as if she had been threshed and discarded like those ears of wheat her father had cut with a sharp sickle, with a sharp motion, and then pulling it down tight with a stiff rope so it wouldn't come undone and the ears wouldn't disintegrate. That's how this little stack felt to Jennifer. What am I supposed to do now? Jennifer muttered. Talking aloud suddenly calmed her, helped her to collect her thoughts and assess the situation. Jennifer touched her stomach with her fingertips. The thought of abortion came and went. Smith pressed her lips together stubbornly. No, it's definitely not going to happen. Sin, not sin. Murder is not murder. But I'm not going to do it, she said to herself as soon as the test showed 2 stripes, informing her of her new position. Besides, she's only 17. Jennifer's no pregnancy expert, of course, but she's no fool. She knew full well that an underage pregnant girl 17 and under needs the consent of her parents or guardians to terminate such a pregnancy. If her parents found out about the child, she'd be in for a rough ride. They'd twist her arms and legs and bring her back to her home village. And there she will hang around her parents' necks with a shameful stigma. Until her father will hardly get her to marry someone, or worse, they will hurry to marry off their pregnant daughter at once so that the child will be assigned to her husband, probably the local young potential alcoholic. A bleak and terrifying prospect. But Jennifer wasn't going to have an abortion anyway. There wasn't any particular reason. She just wasn't going to have one. Once that question was settled in her mind, Jennifer relaxed, threw the test in the trash, washed her face, and went into the kitchen to make herself some tea. So she was pregnant and she was keeping the baby. Her next step was obviously going to be a visit to the hospital. There might not be a pregnancy after all, she continued to ponder aloud. It happens. But what a good lesson it would be for me. For Jennifer Smith, it would be a good lesson indeed. And she hurriedly made an appointment. But the thoughts kept running through her head. Well, suppose I'm not pregnant, she said to herself. Then I'll just laugh at this funny situation that almost made me faint to death. Then this will be my own personalized personal nightmare. That's all. And if I'm pregnant, what do I do? Should I tell David or not? Does he need to know? Or would I just ruin his life by telling him? What do I do in a situation like this? Stop panicking, she said to herself. It's not going to do you any good, Jennifer Smith. You need to find out for sure. That's it, she decided. There was no lesson, or it had, but not a very good one. The formidable-looking woman in the white coat gave Jennifer an undecipherable look and told her she was 4 weeks pregnant. Jennifer felt almost nothing from this not new news. No shock, no particular consternation or disappointment, but no joy either. She didn't even try to convince herself that she wasn't pregnant. Somehow getting used to the thought and accepting it now was easy enough. But accepting it didn't mean figuring out what to do. Jennifer took a week off to think about it. Her savings allowed her to do so, and her employers were willing to meet the usually hard-working girl's needs. There was enough time to take care of some things like the police. They were obliged to inform the parents that their underage daughter was pregnant, and there was nothing Jennifer could do about it. She explained that no one had raped her, that the liaison had been consensual, and that seemed to settle the matter. Then she visited the Silicon Valley College of Technology, or rather, she was almost forcibly shoved out of there unexpectedly by her roommates. Jennifer was surprised her roommates, though quite friendly and understanding, didn't usually show this much interest in her. Come on, they cooed. We should give her a warning, and either go to distance learning or take a sabbatical. You're an excellent student. Won't you take a vacation? And you and the baby need a vacation, and you need to quit your job. You're there all the time. You're always in a dreary languor. Yeah, and what am I going to live on? Jennifer exhaled tiredly, but she went to college, and her new situation really needed to be reported because it could cause even more problems afterward. Better to settle it herself. We'll decide there, one of her roommates declared, sliding her fingers quickly across the touchscreen of her phone. The college listened to her, wondering if it was mutual or if she needed help contacting the police. She just turned 17. Little did the scoundrel actually commit a crime. Jennifer only smiled indulgently. This was definitely not her way. She declined, and without too many more questions, she was helped to lay out a plan of action. Study while you can, the vice principal for academic affairs said. We'll see if you can get through this session in time. Summer's coming up, after all, and then we'll see. Will you be able to walk for a while, and when it comes to childbirth? Will you switch to distance learning temporarily, or will you just hand in your assignments like part-time students? And we'll Thank you. Jennifer said, heartfelt, feeling really touched. She didn't know many people at their small college, working hard and studying even harder, and somehow the warmth and helpfulness of a stranger had touched her to the core. The vice principal patted her arm embarrassedly. Come on, it's nothing. Weren't we young ourselves? The woman sighed. Study while you prepare. Being a mom isn't easy. We'll deal with problems as they come, and this guy should know how to protect himself. And she laughed, bitterly, to Jennifer's taste, too bitter and too much personal in the laugh of this woman who was no longer young. But she didn't ask, of course. One way or another, the college problem was solved. At work, too, she was in her situation, offered to work while she could. And further on the state of health will be looked at. The director of one of the restaurants even personally checked all her equipment and allocated a large cart to carry a bucket of water and rags, and asked the staff to make sure Jennifer didn't lift anything heavy. In the second restaurant, she began to offer to move to a better position as a waitress, but there too, sometimes it was necessary to lift heavy trays. So Jennifer declined. For now, you can work like this, and what will happen next? After learning of her daughter's pregnancy, her parents sent letters. Apparently, she wasn't even worthy of a phone call. Jennifer stared at the letter as if it might cause her physical pain. For long minutes, she hesitated to open it, even though deep down she knew what it might say. Of course, once she was pregnant, there was no turning back for her. And if there was, it promised only a thorny path. She expected neither support nor approval, but when she opened the letter, she was unexpectedly surprised by its contents. Her parents condemned the fact that she had become involved with a man without marriage. They wrote that the city had corrupted her and brought out the worst in her soul, but praised her willingness to keep this child. No matter what anyone says, abortion is murder, the father wrote. It is your cross, your blighted youth, and you have chosen to accept it and carry it with dignity. And that act deserves respect, nothing more. Her mother had sent her a small amount of money, Jennifer realized, secretly from her father. Her mother had her own small savings with a small note for her grandchild, and Jennifer felt better for some reason. Perhaps one day they would even make up again when she had a baby. She'd have to make sure she went to see her family. And now, at least, she knew what last name and middle name she would give her son. And in the end, that was the only question that remained unresolved. What to do about the baby's father, whether to tell him or not. Did David need to know? He definitely had a right to know that he was having a baby, but what if she made it worse? David's wedding is in a couple days. He can dislike this marriage and dislike his wife all he wants, but his family needs this, and that's her. On the other hand, he has a right to know. It's his child. Rather embarrassed, Jennifer did what probably every girl in a similar situation would do in her place. She turned to the other woman, in her case Kate's neighbor, who was the oldest. Tell him. Kate shrugged. They didn't know the details of Jennifer's story, only in general terms. And Smith hoped that would be enough to get some advice. He's certainly not likely to be your boyfriend, your husband, but he might make a good father to a child. You tell him, and whatever he decides there is up to him. All in all, the advice made sense, and Jennifer decided that was what she would do. But she couldn't get in touch with David. He wasn't in the office right now, and neither were his parents, and she couldn't ask the deputy for his phone number. Some cleaning lady wouldn't be given the personal number of the heir to a financial company. And it was unwise to go into details. And somehow, slowly, she came to one single option. She needed to get to the wedding. A crazy decision, but the only option if she wanted to do the right thing. Fine, she'd say. And there would be what would happen. Where the wedding would be was well known to her and probably to the rest of the town as well. Jennifer spent a couple days in anxious anticipation, and on next day, she packed up and headed to the reception. So, she wouldn't get thrown out right away. She studied a few news channels and tried to dress the way reporters looked at such events. If anything, she could pass for some cherished journalist. At the big reception, she did manage to get lost among the guests. From afar, she saw David. He was very handsome in his wedding suit, smiling at the guests, hugging his beautiful bride. The girl was indeed pretty in her elegant, beautiful couture dress. The light skin on her face was so soft, transparent, and from behind her long dark lashes, a pair of dark blue proud eyes smiled. For a moment, Jennifer felt bitterly like the Little Mermaid watching the wedding of the prince and princess and holding the sharp dagger she should stab the prince in the heart with. Jennifer stood there wondering if she could do it. Amanda Adams walked past her, a tall, statuesque, beautiful woman in a green velvet dress. Jennifer watched as she stepped out to obviously get some fresh air and headed after her. She'd seen Amanda Adams a couple times, but they hadn't spoken, and it was unlikely Amanda would have recognized her when they met. But Jennifer suddenly decided it would be easier to talk to her first. Damn her. The woman stood back, looking off into the distance, as if searching there for some answers to difficult questions. Jennifer coughed politely, alerting her presence, and Amanda Adams turned to her, looking with polite interest. "Good evening," Amanda nodded, passing her an appraising glance. Jennifer was wearing a blue cashmere sweater and a knee-length black skirt with knee-length boots. "Which newsroom are you from? I've made some comments to specialized publications before, but I don't think—" "I'm sorry, Amanda," Jennifer interrupted her gently. "I'm not a journalist. I worked for you cleaning conference rooms a while back in David's office. But I don't think now is a good time," Amanda said patiently, but there wasn't an ounce of recognition in her eyes. Jennifer shook her head. "That's not it. I had a brief affair with your son a few months ago. A brief affair, and now I'm expecting a child." "Yeah. Oh no, not that scoop." Jennifer froze again. Amanda Adams wrinkled her nose as if from a headache and gave Jennifer a contemptuous glance. Unlike the other looks, this one was full of contempt and squeamishness that Amanda didn't even hide. Jennifer felt like she'd been stabbed with a sharp blade. The intonation, the whole expression on Amanda's face confused her clearly, and all the words she had prepared slipped from Jennifer's mind. She'd expected yelling, scandal, something else, but not like this, not some strange weariness on Amanda's face. Jennifer was so dumbfounded that she couldn't utter anything but a hoarse. "I'm sorry, girl," Amanda Adams uttered, and there was something resembling genuine sympathy in her voice. Nevertheless, the squeamishness in her eyes did not diminish. It was an even more humiliating mixture. "Think of something more interesting." "I don't." "What could be more interesting than pregnancy, though?" Jennifer shuddered. The picture hadn't yet formed in her mind, but it was slowly taking shape, and it was a disappointing one. But Jennifer wasn't going to wallow in her thoughts. She shook her head and tried again, trying to maintain her general confidence. "I don't know what you're talking about," Amanda Adams said. I really don't know how many people like you inform me and my husband, more often David directly, that he's supposedly about to have a baby." Jennifer fell silent again, dumbfounded. She supposed she wasn't the first, nor would she be the last. And at the moment, probably not even the only one, and she wasn't going to be offended or jealous. She wouldn't mind staying friends with David. They might not have had a future, but it happens. That sentence made Jennifer almost laugh hysterically. She was afraid to talk about pregnancy for many reasons, but she hadn't expected to hear something so absurd and funny. "The first three I still believed. One turned out not to be pregnant at all. The other two were carrying children, but not with my son. David likes girls. What can you do?" Amanda Adams pressed her lips tighter together so that they looked like two thin pink strings. After a moment, she spoke again. "That's partly why we spoil him." "I'm not lying," Jennifer said calmly and firmly, realizing deep down that she was getting nowhere. Amanda Adams didn't believe her. She had reason to believe her. Jennifer wasn't even offended. "You could very well be pregnant." Amanda Adams nodded, looking at the girl's loose clothing, which didn't hide her slimness. "And you may well have had an affair with my son, especially if you worked for us. But he's getting married today." She cut her off sternly. "To a girl who will benefit him and our family, who will strengthen our still small empire. Or are poor girls like you materially better off? Or are they just insulted that they didn't pick up a rich guy? There are plenty of paupers who want to rise at the expense of my son and our family, and everyone's going to tell you they're pregnant. Of course they will." "You're wrong," Jennifer said, adjusting the hem of her skirt. Amanda looked at her without any particular expression. "You're wrong. I'm not going to prove anything to you. Just know that you will have a grandchild." And she headed in the other direction away from the celebration. "Take care of yourself, girl," Amanda Adams shouted after her. "Get on with your life. Study, work, don't try to be a fraud." As the girl's blue sweater disappeared around the corner, Amanda exhaled heavily. Her heart suddenly felt strangely tight and relaxed. "Just what I need is a stroke," she thought wistfully. "Mom," David's concerned voice sounded. The young man came over and gently held his mother's elbow. "Are you all right? Come, sit down and have some water." "Thank you, my son," Amanda Adams said softly, slowly walking with her son toward the other guests. What a good son she had, and how could she make him go through all that stress again because of a girl who wanted to make an easy way out of her financial situation? You can't. "Who was that with you?" David asked. "Calm down," Amanda Adams exhaled. "Not with anyone." Jennifer wouldn't give up. Talking to Amanda Adams had only made her more confident in her own decision. "Let no one believe in us," Jennifer thought, stroking her stomach. "Let them, and we'll do it all and handle it all." The conversation had left a little bitterness, but Jennifer got over it quickly. This was no time to be sad and feel sorry for herself. The next few months of her life were filled with major and minor household problems. The landlady of the apartment where they rented a room had gently explained that she didn't need a tenant with a child, and it would be fine if Jennifer moved out before she gave birth. That news hadn't had time to settle in Jennifer's mind, and a plan of action hadn't even been lined up when Catherine and the other girls stunned her with another one. "We've discounted the college for you for the first time," Catherine said, holding out a puffy envelope to Jennifer. "And one of the guys found you an apartment. His great-uncle lives overseas and is willing to rent to decent tenants for just the communal rent." "And you're a lady of integrity," Catherine chuckled. "We've already paid for the first time, and then they think you can manage on your own. But we're not leaving you behind, if any—" "Thank you," but Catherine interrupted her imperiously. "No buts." And Jennifer obediently closed her mouth, feeling tears come to her eyes with gratitude. "It's a drop in the ocean, of course," Catherine continued. "Some people say, what I do is a drop in the ocean. But it's not how much you've done that matters. It's how much love you put into your work. Let the humblest help. Most made, but with a lot of love. There are a lot of us students. A couple of times we'll give $100, $200. We won't be poor. Everyone can find themselves in a difficult situation. We are all human beings. And how are people supposed to help their neighbor?" And she chortled and kissed Jennifer's forehead patronizingly. Jennifer even sobbed. Why did she get such good people in her life? And then her ordinary everyday life went on. They wouldn't have been any different than they had been before David and before her connection with him. If only now Jennifer didn't have to go to the hospital and make sure she didn't lift anything heavy. She endured at Golden for a while longer, but when her situation became more apparent, and when Amanda Adams saw her again, she was calculated and fired, paying 3 paychecks without even being allowed to work the allotted time. Jennifer used the money to buy some things for the newborn, but something comes and something goes. And soon after she was laid off, Jennifer was hired to work at her own college, the Silicon Valley College of Technology, dealing with paperwork, reports, references. It's not hard work, but it pays well, and it's a lot closer to school. Studying got a lot easier. The guys continued to help her little by little to pull through and let already used, but good things for the child: a crib, diapers, a table, a bathtub. For the first year of the child's life, she was provided with almost everything. And then, almost on the same day, according to doctors' predictions, she gave birth to a boy. She had such a big belly in the last few weeks, or it just seemed that way against her lean body. But Jennifer thought her baby would be big, and the boy was born small, petite, dainty. To his mother's relief, he looked almost nothing like his father. He had Jennifer's father's facial features: blonde, golden hair, and maybe only his eyes gave him away as David's son. Too attentive and tenacious. Jennifer named the baby Alex and gave him his grandfather's middle name and her last name. That's how Jennifer Smith's life had a new meaning, small and huge at the same time. Alex Thompson. From a few days after her dismissal from the company, she wasn't particularly interested in the fate of Golden. And what was up with the Polskis? Of course, some news hadn't passed her by. Company expansion, a successful union, a beautiful wife, a husband showing up at some events without his young wife. All of this news passed fleetingly, and Jennifer only had time to fleetingly think, I hope he's doing well and can be happy. Neither love, longing, nor bitterness of resentment did she feel. Maybe only a slight sadness. She had wanted to be David's friend, but it happened the way it happened, and Jennifer didn't regret it. Alex had been jaundiced at birth, so their discharge was a little delayed. Jennifer's friends and just a few fellow students had visited before then, so she wasn't really expecting anyone for the discharge. Catherine and her boyfriend Andrew arrived in the early morning, congratulated her again, and took some of her things away. And Jennifer had to wait until lunchtime to go home on her own. Alex, no one, cradled in a huge down comforter, looking out at the world with his bright eyes so far. And Jennifer was smiling down at him dotingly. But here, baby, you will see your first home. You already have your own room, can you imagine? She said. Alex mumbled something in agreement without opening the peephole. Jennifer carefully covered his face with a light veil, sewn into a blanket so that the sun would not blind. And she couldn't resist admiring her son once again. She didn't know much about babies, but for some reason, everyone called him beautiful. And Jennifer, like a good mother, was ready to take it on faith. A beautiful baby indeed. As she walked out with that adorable little bundle, several cars pulled up to the doorstep of the maternity hospital. Jennifer stepped aside, figuring it was the wife or some other relative, some important person, and walked leisurely to the edge of the stairs, not wanting to be disturbed. But then the door of the first car opened, and a woman stepped out. Jennifer didn't recognize her at once. Jennifer, hello. Did I recognize you right away? Amanda Adams nodded at her, smiling. Jennifer didn't take to judging how genuine that smile was. She just froze at the bottom of the stairs, looking at Amanda Adams. A man stepped out from the other side of the car, and after a few moments, Jennifer recognized him as David Smith. Jennifer nodded to him, David, as well as his spouse. In his hands was a bouquet of bright red roses. Jennifer was so dumbfounded by what was happening that she stopped like a stumble. Congratulations. David nodded, carefully placing the bouquet in Jennifer's hands. The young mother grabbed the bouquet while supporting the baby. David took the opportunity to lean his head slightly toward the baby, politely trying to look into his face. And Jennifer turned her son automatically, allowing her to look at him. Thompson was sucking on a funny pacifier labeled Mommy's Joy, and looked up at David Smith with his serious eyes. Congratulations again, David said solemnly. I hope the boy is well. Yes, thank you, Jennifer finally replied, managing to control her surprise. Thompson is completely healthy. Alex. Amanda Adams smiled strangely. Alex then means protector in ancient Greek. She looked at her husband for some reason. It's not a bad name, David Smith said. And then Jennifer suddenly realized why they had come. She didn't know what had happened in their family, why they were here, why they wanted her son, and a real rage rose in her soul. She had accepted their decision, their refusal, and was going to live without them, to raise it. And now they had come and were trying to take over her perfect picture of the world for some reason. Not just to fit in, to squeeze in without asking, to be in a place where they weren't expected because the Smiths felt alien and hostile. Jennifer pulled herself together, cradled her son in her arms. She suddenly seemed much older herself. No, she said calmly, but firmly and firmly. Amanda Adams had already pressed her lips together, and David Smith's face had turned cold. Like Jennifer herself, they braced themselves for a fight. His name is Thompson Alex. He has my last name and my father's middle name, Jennifer pronounced. This boy is our grandson. You weren't so sure of that 8 months ago, but now you are, David Smith asked. Jennifer smiled thinly, and there was a frightening resemblance between him and his wife. Jennifer was becoming more and more uncomfortable. With money you can be sure of many things, Smith said coldly. The couple pretended she hadn't said anything. We haven't let you out of our sight for the last couple of months. We didn't believe you at first. But there's a lot of people who want to rise at the expense of your son and your family, and everyone will tell tales of pregnancy. Obviously, yes, David said. I remember, Jennifer said firmly. Why would you choose to believe me now? The couple remained silent for a few more minutes, looking at the baby. Amanda turned pale, and David's face became even more rigid and detached than before. Jennifer clutched the baby tighter to her, feeling some completely unfamiliar and irrational panic, wanting to pull Alex as tightly against her as possible and rush to run as far away as possible from these people who were staring at them. So she hadn't really thought about whether or not she had any maternal instincts in the direct sense of them before, but now it felt like some bright torch had flared up inside. Nothing less than the behavior or actions of a mother toward her child for the purpose of protecting and preserving it, caring for it, nurturing it. "Andrew," David finally said gravely, almost immediately after the honeymoon was in a car accident. Her husband, Alex Thompson, wrinkled his face in a special way when he said that word, as if he had seen and even eaten something disgusting. She got off with a minor scare and some minor bruises. David was unbuckled, flying out the windshield. "No," amazed, Jennifer exclaimed, and her heart clenched. A pang of anxiety and consternation. Such events are shocking when you just read or hear about them, but when it happens to someone you know, especially someone you know so well, the father of her child, the child as it were, the child who had forbidden her to do so. Startled by the loud sound, Jennifer immediately began rocking him, and Amanda Adams leaned over and kissed her son on the cheek. "Oh my God, he's alive," she asked excitedly, trying not to raise her voice again. "Alive," Alex said briefly. And in that one word were hidden all the fears and anxieties, worries and strength invested in keeping David alive. Not even healthy, but just alive. Jennifer wouldn't be surprised if it turned out that they'd almost pulled their only son from the dead. He's paralyzed from the waist down. Maybe the son will be able to walk one day, but he won't have children. Jennifer understood. Her voice trailed off in frustration when the whole picture formed in her head, a gruesome picture. She realized why they had come. "Right," Alex nodded. "And his wife left right away, bitch." Alex didn't hold back and immediately coughed. "Sorry, didn't mean to insult the ex-sister-in-law," he added. "Easy, but you must have realized by now where we're going with this." Enough with the words. Amanda Adams issued through gritted teeth. "We're after the boy, our grandson." Jennifer shook with anger. She felt like she was about to either scream at them or silently ram it down their throats. She didn't understand why such a suggestion made her mad, since she had already realized what they wanted to talk to her about, but she still found herself dumbfounded and angry. They had come for her grandson, but of course. So she had given them her son. No way. Let them get the hell out of here. "You think about it?" Jennifer interrupted Jennifer with an imperious wave of Alex's hand. "You're young, you're studying, you're working, you have your whole life ahead of you. Hundreds of opportunities and a baby now." The man shook his head. "You're good for doing something like this, aren't you? It commands respect. But now we're ready to take over that responsibility. Let us take our grandson into our home, Jennifer." Jennifer pulled Alex close to her, tugging the blanket a little, covering his face. The baby was already asleep, and Jennifer even envied him for a second. How nice and easy it was to escape into the dream world and fall asleep, to hide under the blanket from the complicated and scary suggestions of these people. Jennifer didn't have to make a decision. It had been made from the moment she found out about her baby. The Smiths looked like they had no doubts about the decision she would make. Maybe she already had, and was just waiting for her to voice it. Jennifer closed her lips, dry with excitement, and gave them the answer. "Jennifer Brown," Amanda Adams began. But Jennifer wouldn't listen to her. I'm not giving him to you. Alex is my son. I gave birth to him, and I won't let you take him away." "Think carefully," Alex said calmly, covering his spouse's shoulder with his hand. Amanda Adams blushed in annoyance. She apparently didn't want to come and take her grandson from an obscure girl at all. To have all these conversations, for her to come here and talk about taking the child away meant summarizing the tragedy that had happened to her son. It meant that she was admitting that her son's life was broken and could never be made whole again. And he will never be able to stand on his own 2 feet and walk. And he will absolutely never be able to have children. His continuation lies in this child he accidentally conceived with a 17-year-old college student who works at his parents' company as a janitor. And all of this, every detail of this equation caused her as a mother nothing but monstrous disgust. If it had been another girl, another child, another time, Amanda Adams would have been a happy grandmother. But this was the way things were happening, and it was making her angry and annoyed. "We're going to give the baby everything it needs," Alex, meanwhile, continued. "And we won't abandon you. We won't take Alex away from you at all. All we need is all the rights to the baby. Give him to us, his future, and you'll both live well. We'll raise him to be a worthy heir to our business, just as we raised David," Jennifer muttered coldly. She hadn't even realized that she could raise him that way. A miserable, unloved child whose worth was determined only by how useful he was to the family in your empire. Raising a lonely man who rushes from girl to girl just to feel a little bit of love. Amanda Adams fell silent. "You don't know anything about us. Give me the baby." She was ready to lunge at Jennifer, to rip Alex from her arms. The girl held her son tighter against her and took a step back. "First come near me and I'll scream. I'll tell them you're trying to steal my son from me." "Ladies, let's be reasonable," David said calmly and imperiously. He looked at Jennifer with cold, glassy eyes. "Raise your son on your own if you wish. But don't refuse our help either. This is our grandson. We'll be visiting you." And so it came to pass. David kept his word. They visited their grandson often. David came too. The sight of this young, handsome boy in a wheelchair hurt Jennifer's heart, but she could do nothing to help him. The accident had taken its toll on David, as if he were older and quieter, calmer. He visited Jennifer alone, without his parents, accompanied by a large man who was now his driver, his secretary, and helped him with transportation. Jennifer learned later that this huge, broad-shouldered man, a natural closet, was actually quite a nice and polite man. As Jennifer gave Alex into her father's arms, a lone tear rolled down David's cheek. "So that's what you are," he muttered. "My son." Now Jennifer was crying herself. David's helper was in the kitchen so as not to embarrass them, and they sat there and just cried. The only one not crying was little Alex, who was looking at the adults with slightly cloudy green eyes like his father's. Somehow, having a father and grandparents around made it perceptibly easier to ask them to look after their grandson. Jennifer was a little apprehensive, but David was always happy to babysit his son. He came at his first request, helped out, and in general they had a good relationship. There was no burden of first unhappy love between them. They understood each other well. David had even been sympathetic to her firm refusal to put him on Alex's birth certificate. Apparently, he understood as well as she did what his parents were capable of. So a few years passed. Jennifer graduated and continued to work at the Silicon Valley College of Technology. Of course, now she was more motivated. She had a son, and it was worth working harder and harder for him. So when she was offered a job at a small screenwriting publishing house in her senior year, she jumped at the opportunity. David's parents helped, periodically came to visit her, bringing gifts for her and her grandson. There was no more talk of taking the boy away, so Jennifer let them socialize. After all, they were Alex's relatives, but she never took anything for herself. When Alex was 2 and went to daycare, his mom had just finished her college education. "Come on, Jennifer. What about Alex? They both have new adult lives." David laughed as he dropped off a new bag of stuff for his son. Mother to work, son to daycare. "Very funny," Jennifer muttered. She was spinning around in front of the mirror, trying to figure out whether the new skirt looked good on her or not. Alex was also looking at himself in his new denim overalls and glasses. David could hardly contain his laughter. "So what do you think?" she finally asked. "Are all the men yours?" David hummed. "What? Of course they are," Jennifer burst out. "I was a bad experience. Now your motto is no men." Jennifer looked at him painfully in the reflection of the mirror. David was looking at her with some strange curiosity and concern. "Lex," Jennifer smiled softly, "it's not about you. Or rather, not really about you, but after an adventure like this, I don't want any relationship at all. Alex is my greatest meaning in life, but I don't want to get burned again." "I understand," David nodded. "Don't worry, Jennifer. You're a beautiful, smart, nice girl. You're bound to meet someone worthy." He smiled. "We had so much fun, though," and nodded at Alex, who had already gotten to his mom's phone and was trying to unlock her new job. Jennifer was combining her position as assistant director and screenwriter. Her work was being recognized, and she was moving up the career ladder rather quickly. Leaving her parents' house, Jennifer Smith did not even think that everything would turn out this way. She did not expect to become a young mother. She only thought about her studies and work. And that's how it all happened. Jennifer didn't regret the connection with David or the fact that the baby was born. Yes, her life had taken an incredible turn. But it was even better this way. She had the most important person in her life. Her son, Benefit, who was already 3 years old. There was the father of her son, a good and understanding friend, David, a favorite job that brought her good money. What else was there to look forward to in life? "Mom, you're so great," Alex said to her one day when she was taking him to preschool. "Really?" Jennifer laughed softly. She sat down to kiss her son on the cheek. "Yes, yes." Alex nodded seriously, and his cap almost flew off his head. "We were talking about our parents at daycare. Who works where, and I said something for the ones on the wall. A lawyer, a screenwriter." Jennifer corrected him affectionately. "And the guys found it interesting." "Harry," Alex even jumped up. "I said that you make up new tales for me every time." "I'm glad you're proud of me," Jennifer said seriously. They crossed the road, and Alex tugged her sleeve. Jennifer sat down, and he put his arms around her neck. "I'm very proud of you, Mommy," he pronounced, even if he didn't fully understand the meaning of the word. "Proud, and I love you very much." "I love you too, son. And couldn't you be happier?" And that thing David was talking about. Jennifer didn't care whether she had a boyfriend or not, whether she was in a relationship or not. What did it matter? Men were interested in her, trying to get to know her, but Jennifer refused periodically, and it became quite a fun joke for David. But he tried not to joke about it too often. He himself ended up behaving the same way Jennifer did. Work, son, home, and no relationship. Jennifer thought it would stay that way, and for quite some time. But, as is often the case, fate had other. "I'm sending you on a little business trip," her boss told her. "For training, a couple of master classes, different new techniques. You'll take things to the next level, and then there will be some festival with foreign guests." David and his family were more than happy to babysit Alex for a couple days, and Jennifer left him, though not entirely at peace. David promised to send video reports and record messages. Alex promised to be the most obedient boy in the world, and Jennifer left. The training and workshops were indeed interesting. They involved a lot of practice, i.e., knowledge was reinforced by assignments, and Jennifer wrote some small scripts. She immediately sent them to her boss, and he chose a couple of options for future work, after which he wished Jennifer a pleasant vacation at the festival. There, Jennifer immediately joined a company of young screenwriters who were working abroad and equally young foreigners. Gradually, the conversation turned to personal topics, and Jennifer mentioned that she has a child. "Do you have a child?" asked one of the men as they stepped aside. The girl nodded approvingly. "David, how is she doing?" and answered more in a machine than in earnest. David had sent her a message. Jennifer watched with amusement as the boy splashed in the bathtub full of bubbles. "Yes, I didn't introduce myself," the man said immediately and held out his hand to her. "My name is James." "Jennifer," she smiled, shaking his hand in return. "Smith." For the first time, she looked at her companion. He was a tall, very slender man with long legs. Jennifer might have called him handsome. He had delicate hands, calm eyes, and a long, pale face. His amber-colored skin was flawless, and his stiff black hair was cut short. "Where are you from?" Jennifer asked. "From England," James answered readily. "My ancestors were immigrants, but I returned to my historic homeland, studied Russian, and now I'm back to immerse myself in the language. In love with your language, so to speak." "It's just that you have almost no accent," Jennifer remarked. "How long have you been living in a language environment?" "Almost 3 years. But I want to go back to my homeland someday to live there for a while," James sighed. "Yes, as they say, it's good to be away, but home is better." They spent the remaining 2 days of the festival in each other's company, attended a few more events together, and even went for a walk together. James was unexpectedly easy and pleasant to be with. She wasn't restrained by the strange coldness that seemed to freeze every cell of her body when the man was around. He was easy to breathe with, seemed polite, natural. Jennifer caught herself thinking that the last person she'd had such an easy time with was David, And at the same time, she was bitter to discover that she didn't really have anyone in her social circle except David and old friends, who were mostly girls. And with James, it was different with James. It was almost painful for her to leave him. "Look, can I ask you a not-so-polite question?" James asked when they met for breakfast at the hotel where the forum and festival participants were staying. Ask, and then it depends on how impolite it is. "What's your relationship with the baby's father?" James asked. Jennifer was surprised to see that he was embarrassed. She wondered. James used to take her out for walks. They spent a lot of time together. He'd even given her gifts, and it could be called flirting and dating, only unobtrusive and very polite. But in another, James made no secret of his almost obvious interest. "Well, we're friends, whatever that sounds like," she laughed, then shook her head. "We had a spontaneous thing going on there. It's a long soap opera-style story." On television, James nodded, stirring his tea. "Then I could say, come and visit you." Jennifer looked at him and really thought about the answer carefully before she gave it. Did she need this? Was she ready for this? For a new relationship? For a man in her life that had already stabilized? Life would change abruptly again. Even if things wouldn't work out between her and James in the future, it was a pretty risky move. "Jennifer, I'm not expecting any of this," James said immediately, raising his hands. "But I thought we were having a great time. We're both adults. Why should we deny ourselves the chance to hang out with each other? And it doesn't bother you that I have a kid?" "No, of course not," James smiled. If Alex has a temper like that, it'll be even more fun. "So I can come visit you?" "Yes," Jennifer said firmly, not giving herself a chance to think about it. "You'd be very welcome." She held out her hand to him. James smiled contentedly and kissed her knuckles. A couple days after Jennifer came home, James did come over. He had rented a small apartment in town, and they saw each other almost every day. James even got to know David, and he got to know Alex. Jennifer had laughed at them for a few more days afterward as they looked, almost equally appraisingly, at the potential man in Jennifer's life. Wesley, but one and the other had been forced to admit that James was a good man, gallant, punctual, polite, because of the age difference. David's parents were wary of him, but they weren't about to voice their opinions to Jennifer. Things went smoothly and romantically for them, not as fast as they had with David. They moved in together and James started living with them. Alex eyed him suspiciously at first, but quickly grew to like this new man in his mom's life. Besides, James had a way with people. They were soon married quietly, modestly. 6 months after they met and after some time, James talked about how they could generally go to live in England. It was easy for Jennifer to transfer to a remote job, and if she wanted, they could go to another country for a year and a half. Jennifer. Besides, there was James' parents and significant others to get to know, and Alex, who James was already calling son. If they liked it, they could stay there forever. "You'll take my last happiness in life," David said, sighing heavily when Jennifer told him about their plans. "But I understand you. You have to live your life. Be happy. Besides, it might be hard for me, but I'll be able to visit, right?" Of course, Jennifer smiled as she put her arm around David's shoulders, awkwardly adjusting herself to the side of the wheelchair. Besides, it would be interesting for Alex, too. She exhaled quietly. "I really want to be happy." "David, very," she whispered. David kissed her patronizingly on the top of her head. "Yes, and you will be for sure." But Nicholas and Amanda Adams did not show the same understanding of the situation as their son. The news that their only grandson was being taken overseas, and maybe forever, nearly gave them a heart attack. "You're not going to see our boy," Amanda Adams declared. We'll get lawyers. You're not taking our boy." "I hate to disappoint you, but I don't think you're going to get anywhere," Jennifer stated coldly. It was bitter to realize, but their relationship had not changed over time. Just as they couldn't understand each other, they couldn't understand each other. There was only one fragile thread that bound them together. "Alex, this child is not on your papers. He's my son, and I can take him away." "Will we at least know where you'll take him?" Nicholas asked, stroking his wife's back comfortingly. Jennifer remained silent. A couple weeks later, Jennifer, James, and Alex did decide to go. David couldn't see them off, so he said goodbye to his son and Jennifer at the apartment. Jennifer promised to be in touch, and Alex kissed his daddy goodbye. At the airport, he hugged his grandparents long and thoroughly, comforting his crying grandmother, while his stepfather was doing things, and his mom was patiently waiting for him in the side. "Don't worry," Alex said importantly, like an adult. "I'll write to you and call you. And you too. Come and visit me." Nicholas Adams looked at Jennifer, and she nodded faintly. "I'll tell you where we'll live," she said thoughtfully. The same feeling that had guided her during Alex's first year was guiding her now. This was his family, his closest people. She couldn't prevent them from communicating with each other. "No. Jennifer," Amanda Adams called softly to her. "Forgive us for everything." Jennifer stared at them for a couple minutes, then nodded slowly, smiled, and her son smiled too and waved his little hand at his grandparents. Of course, no one was going to take his grandparents away from him either, and his mom and dad. He's a man after all. He'll take care of it. In her hurry to meet her fiancé's rich parents, Amelie stood up for the old woman. And when she crossed the threshold, Amelie flew home in tears. It was raining, she was soaking wet. The smart sundress, which the girl wore in honor of the solemn occasion, clung to her body. Her hair hung in dull strands along her face. Amelie did not even think to look for shelter. On the contrary, it was even better you could not see the tears streaming down her cheeks. You'd think they were raindrops. Oberon. How could he? Those eyes of his, the timid gaze he carefully hid from her. The man Amelie had long considered the bravest, the most reliable and loving, was almost hiding behind his silent father's back. But the mother of the family was not stingy with her expressions. No, she talked a lot that evening. The target is close at hand. The outline of a large mall, which is only a 2-minute walk from the house, is already visible in the distance. Wow. It took Amelie about half an hour to get from the center. She would have waited longer for the bus, that's for sure. That's what resentment does to people. Amelie didn't even notice she'd gone about 10 or 12 kilometers. Amelie stopped. "No, you can't go home like this. Mom would be there, she'd start asking questions, worrying, and it's not good for her, even dangerous." Mom. Somewhere in Amelie's stomach an unpleasant cold ball moved. Mommy has a very bad heart. The disease progresses with age, especially lately. Mommy needs to avoid unnecessary worry. So Amelie will go to the mall now. She'll dry off a little, have a cup of coffee in the food court, sit, recover, and then put on her face one of her trademark complacent smiles, and only then will appear in front of her parents. Amelie, from childhood accustomed to take care of her mother. Many times the girl witnessed her attacks. Sometimes her mother was even taken to the hospital, and not yet an adult Amelie was left for several days or even weeks alone under the supervision of neighbors, of course, but still. Amelie and her mother had no relatives to look after the girl. They were alone in the whole world. Once Amelie learned that her mom was forbidden to give birth at all. Overheard a conversation between the parent and a friend. Then the girl, of course, asked Jane's mother questions. She at first refused, tried to change her daughter's mind. And then she confessed. "Yes, they told me," she said. "They warned me. But their predictions were wrong. They didn't believe I was carrying you at all. They predicted I'd be dead by midterm. So how did you decide?" I thought, why should I live if I can't have you? You were already with me, living under my heart. How could I ever get rid of you? No, it's the best decision of my life. Amelie sometimes felt guilty, because it was because of her that her mother was in such a state. But her mother, noticing it, even got angry with her daughter. Don't think about such things. I wanted a child myself. How could you influence my decision? Think about it. I wanted to have a daughter like that. And I'm happy I went against all odds. And I was right, by the way. Yeah, well, my heart's racing. Where's the guarantee that it wouldn't have happened without the birth? I've had it since I was a kid anyway. Doctors used to say I'd die during pregnancy. Then they said I wouldn't survive labor. Then they assured me that my child would end up in an orphanage at the age of 2 or 3. So what do we really have? Mother often repeated Amelie that the daughter the most priceless gift that made her life. That it is a great happiness to have such a wonderful child. She also sometimes talked about Amelie's father, and the girl understood that her mother loved this man very much, although she knew him only for a short time. They met by chance, ran into each other in New York on the Brooklyn Bridge. A handsome young man had come to the Big Apple for a student conference, and his mother, then still future, of course, Amelie, had gone on vacation for the first time in her life. She had recently graduated from college, got a job as a dressmaker in an attire, and began to make a good living for those times. So she saved up for a year for a trip. Young people immediately liked each other. They walked together for a long time on the picturesque streets of New York, sat in cafes. The student turned out to be so intelligent and interesting conversationalist that the young girl listened to him, holding her breath. Then they went to his room right that same evening. Both thought that this was just the beginning of the relationship, but fate had ordered otherwise. They agreed to meet at the monument at lunchtime the day after the guy finished another semester. But the girl then never waited for her lover. At first she thought that the student deceived her, but how he looked at her with admiration, gently held her hands. No, it didn't seem to be true. The eyes could not lie. And then the girl went to the hotel where the young man was staying. There it turned out that the students were urgently taken away to some military training camp, exercises or something like that. So he just couldn't come to her. Couldn't get away. That's how we got lost. Amelia's mom sighed with a sad smile as she told her daughter the story. There were no social networks then, so it was impossible to find each other in the vast country. We didn't have time to exchange addresses. I searched for him. Tried to find out information about his city or university in that very hotel. They refused. It's confidential, after all. I'm sure he tried to find me too, but at least I still had you. And how could I turn down such good fortune? Amelie took a seat at a table that was hidden behind a column. She didn't want people looking at her right now. They flowed through the upper floor of the mall in an endless stream. There were couples in love among them. Young people were hugging, smiling at each other, just like she and Oberon, who had recently been happy. But of course it was not certain that this happiness would last long. Not at all. The smiling waiter brought Amelie coffee and wished her a good day. The same friendly in appearance, but in fact indifferent. He doesn't care at all what Amelie's day will be like. It's just his job. The only person in the world who cares about the girl is her mother. Her health is deteriorating. After all, until tonight the girl had hoped that Oberon would too. Oberon loves her too. He had told her that more than once, hadn't he? He was lying. Amelie sipped the hot, fragrant drink with pleasure. A blissful warmth spread throughout her body. It even felt a little lighter. A little. Maybe it wasn't so bad after all. I'd shown my true colors today. It would have been much worse if their relationship had gone further and gotten more serious. And then he'd show her his true colors. But it couldn't get any more serious than that. Amelie thought he was about to propose to her. Why else would he suddenly ask her to meet his parents? Isn't that a sign of seriousness? Amelie was a recent college graduate. She also became a dressmaker like her mother. She loved it from a very early age. She, as a very young girl, sewed outfits for her numerous dolls. She liked to think up interesting models, select materials. The process itself also gave the girl pleasure. It is a miracle there was a piece of fabric or a few pieces. And now this shapeless something turned into a wonderful dress, which makes any doll a princess. Mom worked a lot, so the girl was often left alone at home, left to herself. But she was never bored, sewing and distracted and entertained and gave pleasure. Mom, coming from work, sincerely admired her daughter's creations. She even took these mini masterpieces Amelie in her attire and showed her colleagues. But no fashion designer from Amelie, of course, did not come out. She finished college after high school and got a profession of seamstress, and now worked in an atelier near her home. She loved her work. In her hands, everything went well. The bosses praised the young, talented employee. No one could so virtuoso as she adjust the outfit to the figure. Over time, she was entrusted with the most difficult cases, and the girl coped with them on the hurrah. She even liked difficult tasks. She saw them as a challenge. Amelie ordered herself another coffee. She needed to warm up. She didn't want to get sick and infect her mom. There was no way she could be sick. Amelie had recently done the almost impossible, arranged a consultation with a distinguished professor of cardiology. And it's completely free. Soon her mother will be examined by the best specialists in the region, and perhaps they will choose a treatment scheme that will ease the condition of a woman who is not old yet. Mom is just over 40, and yet like a 100-year-old woman she chokes when she walks. and her shelf in the bathroom cabinet is filled with batteries of medicine bottles. All of this made Amelie sick and very scared. Oberon somehow distracted the girl from these sad thoughts. A switch. By his mere existence, it was as if he lived in some other world. The son of wealthy parents, flitting through life like a carefree moth, meeting friends, traveling, partying. Always smiling and cheerful, he seemed to infect others with his optimism. Oberon is also, of course, handsome, tall, athletic, correct facial features, wide white-toothed smile, charming dimples on his cheeks, and eternal bronze tan on his body. Oberon often traveled with his parents. Even in winter, they flew to the ocean, where they sunbathed and splashed in the turquoise waves. Oberon also dressed stylishly and tastefully. He looked like a guy from a fashion magazine and could easily have been a model. But he had very different plans for this life. Oberon was studying at a prestigious economics university. When he and Helene first met, the guy was just finishing his penultimate year. Ahead was a difficult but interesting year's state exams, writing a diploma, graduation, and then work for his father, a well-known local businessman, owner of a network of car services. What could be in common between this bright representative of the golden youth and a poor girl, recently graduated from college and working as a seamstress? But they had a fateful meeting in a nightclub. Emily had never been fond of such places. For one thing, it was expensive. To visit this club, she spent half of her salary, which was irrational in her situation. But Susie, her childhood friend and neighbor, had asked, literally begged Amelie to keep her company. Susie had always dreamed of a beautiful life and planned at least for one evening to plunge into the atmosphere of an expensive nightclub. She had even bought a dress for the occasion. How could Amelie refuse? Amelie immediately did not like the fact that the table was occupied, and Susie immediately rushed to the dance floor. Amelie recognized her friend's silhouette among the dancing crowd and wondered, what is there to like here? The music is so loud that it seems that my eardrums are about to burst. It's stuffy, cramped, smoky. Well, since I'm here, I'll have to stay with my friend until the end. We can't leave her alone. Amelie put on her favorite tight jeans and a wide flowing top. And as it turned out, she was the one who had guessed the right outfit, not Susie in her dressy dress. Almost all the girls in the club were dressed about the same as Amelie. Not a ball at all. A couple of times she managed to get her friend out on the dance floor. "Did you come to sit here?" Susie asked, her eyes blazing with joy. And Amelie danced among the crowd of young people. Yes, it was certainly nice to relax and let the sound waves take over. At one of these moments, Oberon came up to her. He simply stood beside her and began to dance, copying and complimenting Amelie's movements. The girl, noticing this, was embarrassed, stopped, but he smiled at her in a friendly manner, took her hand and led her in the dance. Amelie spun so deftly and confidently that the two of them seemed to become one. It was an incredible sensation. During the dance, the girl looked at her unexpected beau. Handsome, incredibly handsome, stylish and dressed very expensively. Amelie had an excellent understanding of things, because she worked in an attire. The young man was wearing clothes of expensive brands. How did such a guy even pay attention to her? Perhaps the dance would end, he would smile and leave to his equally rich friends. He probably just liked the way Amelie danced. So he paired her up for a few minutes. But Oberon didn't leave. He asked for permission to walk Amelie to her table. And since there was no one at that table, as Susie continued to conquer the dance floor, the young man offered to keep Amelie company. Wow. Amelie's heart was pounding like a jackhammer. She couldn't believe that a guy like that wanted to hang out with her. That night, they tried to talk honestly, but the loud music was getting in the way, making it almost impossible. Still, Oberon managed to shower Amelie with compliments that she had never heard from him before. "You are very beautiful and plastic. You have simply beautiful eyes." As soon as I saw them, something in me immediately turned upside down, Oberon said, looking directly at Amelie and looking very serious. The guy clearly wasn't joking or being sly. He was saying what he felt. Amelie was confused. Previously, she had only heard compliments about her undoubted talent for sewing. The girl did not consider herself beautiful. At school, the boys did not pay attention to her, noticing only the classmates with more prominent forms. What about Amelie? Skinny, tall, angular, who would look at such a thing? There were no guys at college and no guys at work. So this was the first time Amelie had ever received such delightful compliments that made her head spin. Of course, she fell in love with Oberon at once. In her mind, he was the most beautiful guy in the world, except she didn't believe anything was possible between them. Too different. Oberon asked Amelie to leave him her phone number. Amelie dictated the numbers. The young man saved her number and asked her to do the same with his. Oberon then escorted both friends in a cab home. Svetka tried to flirt with the young handsome man all the way. She, heated by drink and vivid emotions, did not immediately notice that Oberon clearly sympathized with someone other than her. The guy very delicately repelled these attacks, trying not to offend Svetka. With this, he conquered Amelie even more. What a sensitive alert. Before parting, Oberon kissed Amelie's hand. It was obvious that he wanted more to hold the girl against him, maybe even kiss her on the lips. Amelie felt it, but the boy held back and limited himself to an elegant gesture. Still, Amelie didn't believe that Oberon would call her back. The next day was a day off, and Amelie didn't have to go to work. Since the morning, she had been in suspense. On the one hand, she wanted Oberon to call. She wanted to feel the same feelings as yesterday again. On the other hand, Amelie was even a little afraid of it. What if during the day Oberon would be disappointed in her, would notice some flaw that was invisible in the light and music, would find her boring, would realize that they were not the same? See the disappointment in his eyes? That would be painful. Oberon called and said he'd pick Amelie up in an hour. He suggested a trip to the city ponds, a walk in the park, to get to know each other. He added that he couldn't think of anything else but their meeting yesterday. Amelie was very nervous about this date. She tried on all the outfits, choosing the best one, even applied light makeup, which she almost never did. Amelie wanted to hide her excitement from her mother so as not to worry her, but she noticed. Going on a date, she asked with a smile. Amelie nodded. "I'm so excited for you. I hope it's a good one. Just be careful." "Okay, don't worry, Mom. We're going to a crowded place," Amelie assured her parent. The fact that in this crowded place she would go in the car of an almost unknown guy the girl did not mention. Why bother her mom? She cannot explain and prove that Oberon is definitely a good man and will not do anything bad. Her mother had not communicated with him, had not seen his eyes, and I don't think it's possible to put it all into words. Amelie, of course, did not know much about cars, but when she saw Oberon's foreign car, she was stunned. She immediately realized that it was a very expensive model. A dark blue, glossy, streamlined car. The carriage as served Oberon smiled from the driver's seat. Amelie braced herself and got into the car. Despite the huge difference in wealth, Oberon behaved with Amelie simply and sincerely, joked with her, complimented her, asked her questions about her life and told her about himself. Gradually, Amelie relaxed. Oberon is so natural, so intelligent, so sweet. He's nothing like the Majors, the spoiled sons of rich parents. And stop living in stereotypes. All people are different. They took long walks in a beautiful park with fountains, fed the ducks, sat in outdoor cafes, laughed and talked. It feels like I finally met a kindred spirit. Oberon shared his impressions. "You're so real. I've never met anyone like you before." "What are the others like? Artificial or something?" Amelie smiled. "Exactly artificial," exclaimed the boy. "That's a very accurate word. They see in me only a purse and a pleasant appearance. With you, it's completely different." These words made Amelie's heart warm. It made her feel good to know that she was special to Oberon, not one of many. "Yes, that leaves you with nothing but sympathy," the girl joked. "I guess I've been hanging around in the wrong circles." Oberon smiled, looking warmly at his companion. Their romance resembled a fairy tale. Amelie had never dreamed of such a thing. The girl loved paperback novels, but never thought that one day she would practically be the heroine of such a read. Here's the revised text. Oberon made Amelie surprises, showered her with compliments, took her to the most interesting and unusual places in the city that she didn't even know existed. He sincerely enjoyed her reactions, surprise and admiration. "Are you so easy to please, so easy to surprise?" he sometimes said. "It's such a pleasure. I feel like a completely different person around you. I can't even express it." Oberon liked very much the sincerity of the unspoiled Amelie. and the young man often reminded her of how beautiful she was. Showed photos of famous models and actresses similar to her, gave Amelie things that emphasized the advantages of her appearance. Oberon took care of Amelie. He tried to please and protect her. It was so pleasant. The girl was beginning to feel like a real princess, beautiful, fragile, and loved. She had never thought of herself that way before. Of course, her mom noticed the changes happening to her daughter and knew her boyfriends. But they didn't know each other. The woman asked her daughter questions about her chosen one. When she learned that the man was very rich, she tensed up a bit. "Be careful, daughter. After all, rich people choose their life partners as equals, and with the rest they just have fun and spend time," she said. "What's with the stereotypes?" Mom, Amelie argued. "Of course my mom doesn't understand anything. It's not like she doesn't know Oberon, doesn't see the way he looks at me. Oberon isn't like that. And anyway, it's the 21st century, and you're still suffering from some relic of the past." "I just don't want him to break your heart," the woman said, shaking her head and looking anxiously at her daughter. "So what's the bottom line? Did Mom turn out to be right after all? Time goes on. Nothing changes. Could it be that at first Oberon was really enchanted by Amelie? She really wasn't like his previous girlfriends. Modest, unspoiled, hardworking. No whims. Obedience and admiration. Amelie, in an effort to please Oberon, adjusting to his wishes, often agreed with his opinion, even if she herself thought otherwise. She wanted him to be happy with her. But of course there could be no future for them together. Then they were simply blinded by feelings. The girl refused to accept that fact. Amelie and Oberon were together for almost a year. The relationship between them became more and more serious. The girl could no longer live without her lover. He also wanted to spend as much time with her as possible. Only he didn't have as much time as he would have liked. Oberon was finishing his last year of university, and he often went to the sea with his parents. From warm lands, the guy invariably brought his beloved interesting jewelry, bright souvenirs, exotic outfits. The girl missed him. "Someday I'll show you all this beauty. You will look very cool in a white swimsuit against the background of ocean waves," Oberon said. "When I graduate, I'll announce to my friends that I have a fiancé." "Really? That sounds a lot like a proposal deferred in time, but still, of course, a fiancé," Oberon nodded. "And what are you against it? I thought it goes without saying that we would be married soon. Now it is true, is not the time yet, but the event is just around the corner." Amelie simply put her arms around Oberon, snuggled up against him, and closed her eyes. She felt truly happy. As such, Oberon had not proposed to her. There was no ring, no discussion of a wedding. It was simply implied from that very dialogue that they would get married sooner or later. Then Oberon got his degree. His father got him a job, as had been implied from the beginning. The boy started earning decent money. He used to be sponsored by his parents, which he never hid. Now the guy was rapidly becoming financially independent, which he was very happy about. Amelie rejoiced with him and dreamed that now he will finally make her an offer. But for several months after the defense of the diploma, the proposal did not follow. But one day Oberon said that it was time for Amelie to meet his parents because their relationship is very serious. So the family is eager to communicate with the chosen one of the only heir. "Do you think it's necessary?" Amelie clarified. She was very anxious about meeting Oberon's relatives. Family had always been very important to him. The girl knew it and was afraid to disappoint her parents and her beloved. "Of course I will." "Well, what are you worried about?" "Everything will be fine," answered Oberon. Amelie, as always, immediately unconditionally believed the words of Oberon because he then still seemed strong, reliable, decisive. If her lover said that everything would be all right, then it would be so. The meeting was scheduled for Friday evening in one of the most luxurious restaurants in the city. Amelie looked at the photos of the atmosphere of this place in social networks and began to worry even more. She always felt uncomfortable in such interiors, although Oberon periodically invited her to such places. But then it was Oberon himself, and this time she would have to interact with his parents. There was no telling how they would feel about her. On the other hand, even if her mother and father didn't like her, it wouldn't affect their relationship. He is already independent and grown up. He makes his own choices, decides everything in his life. Oberon had emphasized it many times, so Amelie's happiness was not at stake in this situation. but still wanted to please the parents of her beloved, so that in their future family reigned peace, harmony, warm relations. About the upcoming meeting, Amelie preferred not to tell her mother Helene, or she would definitely get excited, and she cannot. Recently, the health situation of Amelie's mother was getting worse. The very young woman was sick. She was often dizzy, her heart was aching. She could barely get to work, stopping at every pole to catch her breath. The doctors would throw up their hands. "What do you want?" "You have a serious defect. They told you not to give birth. You didn't listen." The disease progressed rapidly. "We are not gods and cannot work miracles," said the doctors at the hospital, where Amelie's mother went now almost every week in the hope of getting a new effective treatment. She always got the same answer. But nothing. Soon there will be a consultation with the professor, about which Amelie had agreed. This luminary of medicine will definitely help them. Amelie decided to take the trolleybus to the restaurant. She had no money left for a cab. It was still a week away from payday. The lion's share of her earnings had been spent at the beginning of the month on medicine for her mother. So what if it was a trolleybus? Amelie even liked to ride it across town and look out the window. She sometimes specially chose long routes to admire the city scenery and think about her own. But this time the girl certainly didn't manage to relax. She was constantly winding herself up with anxious thoughts. There was uneasiness in her soul. Intuition told Amelie that the meeting is unlikely to go smoothly. And as it turned out later, her instincts had not failed her. The salon was almost empty. Rush hour was long past. Amelie leaned her forehead against the cool glass and tried to calm down, but nothing worked. Maybe I shouldn't have worn this sundress. It's a nice, decent length below the knee, but the shoulders are too open. Wouldn't Oberon's parents find my outfit vulgar? Maybe I should have gone with a light business pantsuit. But I'm not going to the office, am I? Amelie's thoughts were interrupted by a squeal and a shout from the conductor. Isn't it a shame to ride public transportation as a hare at that age? The girl looked in the direction of the sound. At the far end of the cabin near the driver's seat, an ugly scene was unfolding. The conductor in an orange vest, a bearded woman with her hair highlighted with cheap dye, loomed over a dry old woman. She was huddled in her seat, clutching tightly with her hands a shabby bag full of something, and staring at the conductor in a huff. "I explained to you, my dear, I'm going to my grandson's hospital," came a trembling old man's voice. "I spent all my pension on a present for him. Do you understand?" "No." "Well, what's the pity? If I drive quietly here a few stops, the cabin is still empty. And if it's full, I'll get out of this seat and stand in the corner. I won't take the seat for nothing. Whether it's empty or not is none of your business," objected the old woman. "You have shown up," the conductor interrupted her. "It should not concern you, but you are only supposed to pay for the ticket. Be kind and pay the required amount. If I let everyone ride for free, they would stop paying my salary. Pay up or get out." The old lady kept saying about her grandson Andrew, who was hospitalized and needs a transfer, which is carried to him by a caring grandmother. There are medicines, food, some other things. The elderly woman tried to get through to the conductor, grabbed her heart, and seemed ready to cry. But the controller remained adamant she demanded from the elderly passenger money for the fare, otherwise offered her to leave the cabin. Amelie suddenly felt very sorry for this old woman, who was so eager to see her grandson. Maybe there really is no one else to come to the person. It's not a big deal what kind of situation people are in. The toll is not that great. Of course, Amelie was far from being rich, but she would definitely have such a sum for a good deed. The old woman's eyes were so full of despair and fear. No, Amelie simply could not, like the other few passengers, indifferently watch this scene. "I'll pay for this, grandmother," Amelie said and handed the conductor some change. The conductor gave Amelie a ticket with a scornful glance at the old woman. The girl immediately handed it to her grandmother and wanted to return to her seat. But the rescued passenger grasped her hand with her dry and unexpectedly strong palm. "Thank you," said the old woman fervently. "Thank you for your good deeds. Don't think I'm not a beggar. I have some pension. I've worked at the factory all my life. Well, this month I'm in trouble. Grandson Andrew had an accident. I had to buy him everything. I'm taking him to the hospital," said the old lady. "There's no money left at all. You give me your phone number. I'll transfer it to you when the money comes." Another surprise. It turns out that this old woman knows how to use mobile banking. A modern grandmother. No, not at all, Amelie shook her head. I won't be poor. The girl was adamant that it was a small sum for her. And the old woman, it is immediately obvious, is in a difficult financial situation. All the way to the hospital, the old woman thanked Amelie and told her about her grandson Andrew. By all accounts, he was a very decent young man. Grandma was worried about him. After the accident, he was in the hospital with injuries. But she was glad that her grandson got off relatively easy. The wounds will heal. They won't go anywhere, said the talkative traveling companion. The main thing is that his head is in order. Amelie nodded with a smile. And then the old woman got off at her stop, and the rest of the way the girl traveled in silence. This traveling companion distracted her a little from her anxious thoughts, relieved her excitement. But as soon as Amelie was alone, the anxiety returned. Now, sitting at a table in the cafe, drenched by the rain, Amelie mentally reprimanded herself. She should have listened to her intuition and not gone to this meeting. Now she clearly realized that nothing good could come out of it. She saw the whole situation, but a few hours ago the girl was full of hopes for a happy future together with Auburn. The luxurious atmosphere of the restaurant, of course, added to the girl's excitement. Amelie immediately saw the table where Auburn and his parents were sitting. When he noticed her, he smiled and moved towards her, embraced her, stroked her back, complimented her on her appearance. All this, of course, cheered Amelie up a little. Next to Auberon, she always had a sense of security. As it later turned out, false. Auberon's parents looked pretty much as Amelie had imagined them. Her father was an athletic, trim man with elegant gray hair on his temples, tanned, handsome. The same dimples on his cheeks as Auberon's, the same clear features. It was clear at once who the son resembled. The mother is a well-groomed woman who is, of course, a frequent visitor to beauty parlors. Smooth face with perfect skin, flawless manicure, regal posture, her gaze. The cold stare of light blue eyes. Amelie felt as if she'd been hit by an icy shower when she looked into them. Basically, at that moment, she finally understood everything on an intuitive level, but she hadn't yet realized it with her head. The hope for a favorable outcome was still alive. Well, hello, lovely young ladies, Auberon's father said without a smile. Hello, the girl smiled broadly. At last we have met you. Auberon's mother stretched her lips into the semblance of a polite smile, but her eyes remained serious and cold. Everyone introduced themselves and the waiter brought the order. At first the conversation went on about nothing. The weather. City news. Amelie periodically inserted her lines, trying to be a full participant in the conversation. After each of her remarks, Auberon's parents looked at each other meaningfully. Amelie watched their reactions carefully. And so did Auberon. He watched his parents' faces, trying to read their emotions. At that moment, the young man looked like a small child rather than an independent, attendant adult, and Amelie didn't like that very much. Then the conversation turned to Amelie herself. Tell us a little about yourself, asked Auberon's mother. Our son takes you very seriously. It is not every girlfriend he introduces to us. Although, of course, this is not the first time this has happened. Auberon is a man in love. Nevertheless, I'd like to know more about you. Amelie was disgusted by the not the first time. She was clearly being insinuated that she was neither unique nor one of a kind, but one of many, and the tone of this richly groomed woman was hostile. There was a metallic note in her voice. Well, Amelie told me. Auberon's parents asked her clarifying questions from time to time. Who was her mother? Where was her father? What does Amelie herself do for a living? What educational institution did she graduate from? The girl's answers elicited strange reactions from these people. They looked at each other, grinned. It was unpleasant. Auberon sat next to his mother and remained silent. He did not even try to somehow diffuse the atmosphere and help his girlfriend. Why college? Auberon's mother asked. You probably did not do well at school. You did not get into the university. Amelie let the barb pass her ears. The lady was obviously trying to hurt her and make her emotional. She wouldn't. Amelie did well at school, even very well. She had to get a profession, get a job. The financial situation of their small family was very precarious. but she couldn't explain it all now. The conversation was becoming more and more unpleasant. The questions and remarks of Oberon's parents became more and more personal. It was as if they were turning Amelie inside out. The girl talked about herself and for some reason was ashamed of the facts of her biography, although she had never done anything bad to anyone. But Oberon's mother managed to masterfully humiliate Amelie's story about herself. The girl felt herself at this table, next to these people, a beggar and a limited dullard who did not have enough intelligence for university. A poor girl who dreamed of becoming a rich heiress and thus solving her life problems. Or maybe that's what she really was. Amelie, under the icy gaze of the unfriendly woman, suddenly realized that she had really counted on Oberon's help in treating her mother. Oberon didn't utter a word. He didn't even look at Amelie, moving closer to his father. And so it was as if the young man hid behind his mother's shoulder. He was humiliating Amelie. Oberon didn't even try to stand up for her. It was unlike him to make the girl even more confused. Oberon, he was always on her side after all, supporting her, cheering her up. But now the guy looked like a little boy who was afraid to cause disapproval of parents. And that's when Amelie realized it all. No, there would be no future for her and Oberon together. His parents were now making that very clear to their son. Their aim wasn't even to humiliate Amelie. They were demonstrating to their only heir that a girl seamstress, living alone with her sick mother in a tiny apartment, he is not a match. And the son had learned his lesson well. Oberon will never go against his parents' wishes. He's too dependent on them. All his success and prosperity is due to his father. Amelie's feelings and her worries were completely irrelevant to these people. The girl felt like a textbook. Oberon's mother was not at all worried that such treatment could cause psychological trauma to the girl. She didn't care. The main thing was to show her son the fallacy and absurdity of his choice. Apparently, the meeting itself was conceived for that very purpose. Amelie felt tears coming to her eyes. Why should I be like this? What have I done to these people? She thought. In fact, Amelie had never done a single thing in her entire life that she could be ashamed of. The girl got up from her seat. I understand. I have to go, she said. I don't want to burst into tears in front of this family. No, I won't give them that pleasure. Amelie hurried out of the restaurant. No one tried to stop her. The girl hoped, still hoped, that Oberon would rush after her. Oh, come on. He loves me so much, after all, as he has said more than once. But Oberon stayed with his parents. Amelie burst into tears on the street. It was good that it was raining, and it was not visible to others. She didn't wait for the trolleybus, she walked. Movement always calmed her down. It was raining like a bucket. Amelie's light sundress immediately soaked through and clung to her body. Pedestrians hid under awnings to wait out the downpour. Amelie wandered down the road, not even noticing the discomfort. She wasn't in that state. Oberon. How could he do this to me? I had confidence in the man. Rejoiced that I was so lucky to meet my soulmate so early in life. Turns out I made it all up on myself, Amelie thought. Oberon was only interested in the girl as a curiosity. He was used to meeting with spoiled princesses, and here was a modest girl who had not seen anything bright and interesting in her life. Perhaps it was pleasant for him to feel like a patron, opening the world to the poor beauty. But he had no special feelings for her. Otherwise, Oberon would not have sat there like a statue while his mother humiliated a defenseless girl in front of his eyes. And now Amelie sat in the mall, sipping one cup of coffee after another. Her hair was almost completely dry and now curled beautifully. Her sundress had also become dry, and Amelie had recovered enough that she could now show herself in front of her mother. She would behave as if nothing had happened. It may be dark at heart, but her mother must not notice it. Mama must be taken care of. She's the only person in the world who truly loves Amelie, and probably always will be. Men, they're probably all like Oberon. They can get a nice buzz on your ears and then they're off when they've had their fun. Perhaps her father was the same. Perhaps her mother is hiding something from her. Or maybe she just doesn't realize that the boy she once fell madly in love with has run away from her. Amelie came home and went straight to the bathroom. Did you get caught in the rain? Asked her mother, who was lying in the bedroom holding her heart. Yes, I'm soaked through, she smiled nonchalantly. I want to take a hot shower so I don't get sick. I'll make you some tea. No, you lie down and rest. I'll do it myself, Amelie replied. In the shower, Amelie cried some more. Tears this time brought relief. The bad emotions went away with them. Amelie tried very hard to behave as if nothing had happened. But her mother noticed the change in her daughter. It was impossible to hide anything from her attentive gaze. Have you quarreled with your Oberon? Mama asked. How did you realize it? Amelie was surprised. First of all, you don't go out anymore. It's hard not to notice. And secondly, your eyes have been very sad lately. We broke up, Amelie nodded. He turned out to be a regular mama's boy. It's a good thing I caught it in time. He didn't hurt you. No, not at all. I just saw that he was a mama's boy. I don't want to be around that kind of guy. Yeah, well, I was upset, of course, disappointed. But it's okay now. That Oberon I fell in love with, he didn't even exist, you know. I just made him up. That's what I'm sad about. But I'll be smarter from now on. Amelie smiled broadly, showing her mother that she was doing well. Although, of course, the girl was still in pain. Her dreams of a happy life next to the man she loved had been shattered. Amelie still longingly remembered that former Oberon who existed in her imagination before that meeting in the restaurant. She thought she had met the perfect man, and then suddenly it turned out that such a man probably didn't exist at all. It hurt so much. Oberon's parents, especially his mother, had humiliated her, not hesitating to express themselves and not caring a bit about her feelings. If Oberon had at least tried to protect his girlfriend, to support her, Amelie wouldn't feel so devastated now. But alas. Amelie tried to live her old life, working, going out with her friends, reading a lot to distract herself. She was now constantly cleaning the apartment. The house shone with cleanliness, but the soul did not become clear and clean. And then there was that long-awaited appointment with Professor Walshian. We went to the clinic with my mother. The professor turned out to be a tall, thin old man with shrewd blue eyes. He carefully familiarized himself with the history of the heavy patient. He did not say anything, but ordered some additional tests. All the necessary procedures were carried out in the same clinic quickly, promptly, without cues. The professor himself took Amelie's mother around the rooms. The girl rejoiced, wow, what an attentive attitude. In the local clinic, this was not even close. As it turned out, the professor was in a hurry for a reason. He, as an experienced physician, immediately realized that the case is bad. The situation is critical. After all the examinations, the trio returned to the office. The professor was ready to pronounce his verdict. Well, I have nothing to please you, he waved his hands. I can't even believe that this is the result of the examination of such a young woman. The heart is worn out. It barely works. Medication won't help. We have to operate. Amelie clutched her mother's hand, who was listening attentively to the doctor's every word while remaining calm. The operation should have been done a long time ago. I don't understand how your doctor could let the situation get so bad. The professor sounded clearly annoyed. You can even try to sue him. But that's after. Now the main thing is the operation. And then the professor told the details of the upcoming operation. It was complicated, very complicated. Not every cardiac surgeon would do it for a patient in this condition. It is necessary treatment in New York, and this is travel, accommodation, payment of expensive medicines. And the operation itself cost a fabulous amount of money. When the professor announced the amount, Amelie shuddered. She and her mother simply have nowhere to get such a sum, except to sell the apartment and to be on the street. But even so, still real estate so quickly cannot be realized, and we need the money now. It must be done as soon as possible, said the professor, seriously looking at the confused visitors. Literally every day counts. What will happen if we don't operate? Amy's mother asked. I just can't imagine where to get such a sum of money. Is drug therapy possible? No, the doctor answered immediately. No medication will help you, only surgery. What are we going to do? Amelie whispered. She could hardly fight the tears that were coming to her eyes. All the previous worries about disappointment in Auburn suddenly seemed to her a complete nonsense. Here it was, the real trouble. And what to do about it, I don't know. Try to apply to a charitable foundation, advised the professor. They open collections for treatment. They help many people. The doctor ran his fingers over the keyboard in search of the necessary folder. He found what he was looking for and printed out a sheet with a list of charitable foundations. "We'll find the money. We'll make it work," Amelie told her mother in a confident tone. Every free minute the girl now monitored vacancies. She was ready for anything to go on shift to the north, to respond to dubious advertisements offering obviously illegal activities for relatively good money. But the girl quickly realized that this was not the way out either. Until she gets a job, until she works for a couple of months to be able to apply for a loan, precious time will be lost. And she would not get into trouble herself, not to run into scammers. Most of the ads that promise golden mountains look too suspicious. And if something happens to her, how will mom survive it? Who would help her? Amelie was desperate. She sobbed every day out of helplessness, secretly from her mother. She, on the other hand, seemed surprisingly calm. She seemed to accept her fate and did not even try to do anything, realizing that it was useless. One day Amelie took the desperate step of turning to someone who had no one else to turn to. So she dialed Oberon. Yes, they hadn't communicated all this time. Oberon hadn't called, hadn't written, hadn't even tried to apologize for his behavior at the restaurant. It seemed that he was quite satisfied with the fact that Amelie herself evaporated from his life, less problems, a mountain off his shoulders. After everything that had happened, the girl despised Oberon, considered him a mama's boy. Even his very name irritated her. She deleted all the photos of them together, so that she wouldn't accidentally stumble upon them in her phone. Those pictures hurt her over and over again. She was so happy in them, so in love. And she had no idea what lay ahead of her. But anyway, only Oberon could help her. He's wealthy, he doesn't count money. Perhaps he would lend her the necessary amount, even with interest, just to get the money for her mother's operation as soon as possible. Amelie will never get such a loan, her solvency is too low, but she will try to work wherever she can, as soon as possible to pay off the debt. Amelie is not afraid of work. "Here's a list of funds that really help, not scams," he said. Amelie grasped the list like a drowning man grasping at straws. On the way home, mother and daughter were silent. Each was thinking about something else. The woman was making a difficult choice for herself to fight or leave everything as it was, because the forces in this battle were too unequal. Amelie was frantically searching for a way out. She saw no other way but to fight for her mother's life to the last. When she got home, the first thing the girl did was to call every charity on the list. Amelie hoped they would help. She was sure of it, but no one wanted to help. Amelie got different answers to her appeal. Someone immediately said that they specialize only in sick children, as if adults do not get into difficult situations or less want to live. There were also inexplicable refusals without a clear explanation of the reasons. And only in one place Amelie was explained the essence. "You see, the woman who answered the phone explained in a guilty voice, your situation is not too spectacular. Everyone feels sorry for little children and transfers money to them. Well, they also help fathers and mothers of the kids, so that the kids don't remain orphans, especially mothers. You have a woman, your mom, an adult, working. Her daughter's all grown up. So no one's going to the orphanage, if anything. There's almost no chance that they will respond to the request." Amelie was grateful to her interlocutor for this hard, but the truth. At least now it is clear why all the foundations refuse them. It means that it is necessary to look for other ways out of the difficult situation. Relying on funds is only a waste of time. "Let's put the apartment for sale," suggested the girl. "Cheaper, so that sooner a buyer will be found." "What are you?" sighed the woman. "The operation, it is not known whether it will help or not. And you, if anything, without your corner will be left. And how will you live?" "No, let things go as they are." "No?" Amelie exclaimed. "No, don't even think about it." Aliena felt the prospect of losing her mother frighten her to the point of convulsion. Sure, it wasn't easy to dial Oberon's number, but it was for her mother's sake. If it hadn't been for her illness, Amelie would certainly never have contacted her failed fiancé. Oberon answered at once. His voice sounded a little surprised, but there was no guilt or remorse in it. Oberon spoke to Amelie as if nothing had happened, as if a former classmate had suddenly called him. "Hello, how are you?" the guy asked politely. "Not so good," Amelie admitted. "I hope you're not going to start telling me about your upset feelings now." I just don't like that kind of thing. What was is what was. It's over and done with. We move on. It's not about upset feelings, Amelie sighed. You see, my mom, she's very sick. I told you, remember? Her heart. I remember something like that. So what's the next step? Well, the next thing is she needs surgery or she's going to die. I'm sorry. It's sad. I hope she's going to be okay. The problem is, it's not free. It costs a lot of money. We don't have that kind of money, and there's nowhere to get it. I see Oberon grinned. Wow. My mother is a visionary. She warned me that this would happen, didn't she, Amelie? Well, she said that once the fish was off the hook, you'd try to get your money another way. True. Mom thought it would be a heartbreaking story about your own illness or the news of your sudden pregnancy. But you brought your mother into it. Amelie was taken aback. Did Oberon really think she was just trying to screw him for money? Had he learned nothing about her during the time they'd been dating? How could Oberon say something like that? It's hurtful, painful, hard. Unfair reproaches and accusations of mercantilism hurt her soul. But Amelie pulled herself together. She can't show weakness now, she can't take offense. Oberon is her last hope. Look, Oberon, it's all true, she began in a persuasive tone. I can show you the certificates, the professor's conclusions, the price list of the clinic, Amelie said convincingly. It's all easy to make up, isn't it? The boy bent his mind. The professor will call you himself. I'll ask him. Hey, you're kidding me. Yeah, that call could be made by anyone. You got a sucker. Oberon, but it's true. I can prove it. Besides, I'm not just asking for a huge sum of money. I'll pay it back. I'll pay it all back. I'll write you an IOU. I'll pay you the interest and the debt. My main thing is to pay for the operation as soon as possible. They won't give me a loan. My official salary is too small. Then how are you going to pay back the debt? You said yourself you can't afford the loan. I'll work day and night, I'll work hard. But I need the money urgently right now. That's a heartbreaking story, grinned Oberon. It's a pity such talent is wasted. You could write novels easily, couldn't you? I'm sick of it, the boy said sharply. I'm sick of listening to this nonsense. And at first I still felt guilty that everything turned out this way. You seemed to me a naive and sincere girl, and now I see that my mother was right. I accurately predicted your behavior. That's it. Don't call me again. The phone rang with short beeps. Amelie dialed Oberon's number again and again. She just couldn't convey to him the seriousness of the situation. She should explain it better. He would understand. But Oberon seemed to have blocked her number. That's all. Her last hope evaporated like dew on a hot summer's day. Amelie had no idea who else to turn to. Oberon had trampled and humiliated her again. He's made it clear that he thinks her ex is a fraud. He won't even talk to her. How could he? Tears spurted from the girl's eyes. She couldn't, and didn't want to hold them back. How often had she been crying lately? Amelie was outside, right at the bus stop. Good thing there were no other people around. But what did it matter? Amelie slumped helplessly on the bench, wrapping her arms around herself. She shuddered, her whole body shaking violently. Amelie could do nothing about the condition. It must have been hysteria. She was tired of fighting, tired of knocking on every door and getting rejected everywhere. And then there was Oberon. She had to turn to the man who had once trampled and humiliated her. And he did it again. But most importantly, Amelie was never able to help her mother. Seeing life slowly leaving a loved one day by day was unbearable. Her mother was weakening before her eyes. She didn't even go to work anymore, sitting on endless sick leave. The boss threatened to fire the woman. Who needs such an employee? And what a job. Amelie's mother could hardly move around the house, and she was still so young. And Amelie, a grown-up daughter, can't help her own mother. If it wasn't for her, Mom would be feeling much better now. Vaughn and the professor also said that pregnancy and childbirth finally undermined the woman's health. Large tears ran down the girl's cheeks, and her sobs made it hard to breathe. Amelie could not pull herself together, and then a car stopped right in front of her. It stopped and stopped. No big deal. Maybe it was just a ride to the stop. It happens. Amelie tried her best to calm down so as not to scare people. Yes, somewhere the glass opposite the driver's seat slowly rolled down. Amelie met her gaze with attentive gray eyes. It was a young man, a little older than she looked. He was looking at the girl with undisguised interest. She kept sobbing, unable to calm down. "And I told you there was something wrong with her." I noticed it from afar came an elderly voice from the back seat. The man turned to the invisible passenger and nodded absent-mindedly, then turned to Amelie. "Young lady, what's wrong with you? Do you need help?" No, Amelie objected. She suddenly felt ashamed that she was sitting there crying in front of everyone. People were stopping because of her. Amelie couldn't help it. It must have been hysteria. She was tired of fighting, tired of knocking on every door and getting rejected. And then there was Oberon. She had to turn to the man who had once trampled and humiliated her. And he did it again. But most importantly, Amelie was never able to help her mother. Seeing life slowly leaving a loved one day by day was unbearable. Her mother was weakening before her eyes. She didn't even go to work anymore, sitting on endless sick leave. The boss threatened to fire the woman. Who needs such an employee? And what a job. Amelie's mother could hardly move around the house. And she was still so young. And Amelie, a grown-up daughter, can't help her own mother. If it wasn't for her, Mom would be feeling much better now. Vaughn. And the professor also said that pregnancy and childbirth finally undermined the woman's health. Large tears ran down the girl's cheeks, and her sobs made it hard to breathe. Amelie could not pull herself together, and then a car stopped right in front of her. Yes, somewhere the glass opposite the driver's seat slowly slid down. Amelie met the gray, attentive eyes. It was a young man, a little older than she looked. He was looking at the girl with undisguised interest. She kept sobbing, unable to calm down. "And I told you there was something wrong with her." I noticed it from afar came an elderly voice from the back seat. The man turned to the invisible passenger and nodded absent-mindedly, then turned to Amelie. "Young lady, what's wrong with you? Do you need help?" No, Amelie objected. She suddenly felt ashamed that she was sitting there crying in front of everyone. People had stopped because of her. They were going somewhere on their own. Maybe they were in a hurry, the man continued. "No, don't be embarrassed if someone has offended you or something has happened." Then the back door of the car opened and an old woman stepped out. A light pantsuit, gray hair arranged in an elegant bundle. This old woman bore little resemblance to the old lady in the handkerchief on the trolleybus who couldn't find the fare, and yet it was her. Amelie recognized her. "What a coincidence," smiled the old woman. "It's not a small town. What were the chances of them meeting again? And yet they did." "Agatha, I know you," the old woman smiled warmly. "Andrew, this is the girl from the trolleybus. Remember, I told you who paid for me when I went to your hospital." The man got out of the car too. Now both grandmother and grandson stood in front of Amelie, whose tears had dried from surprise. Of course I remember this story. The young man smiled at his grandmother, and then looked at Amelie. "Imagine I was in a minor traffic accident. I was taken to the hospital overnight just to observe. I didn't even want to tell my grandmother. It's just that a friend of hers works there as a nurse. So I blabbed. Well, and Grandma dropped all her affairs, bought on the remnants of the pension to me food and medicine for a year ahead and rushed to the hospital," said Andrew with a slight irony. "Here you are again ironizing." The old woman looked reproachfully at her adult grandson. "But you'll understand me when you raise a child from infancy and put your soul into it. Then we'll talk about unnecessary worries and anxieties." Amelie was pleased to watch this friendly altercation. Kind, caring, sensitive people who obviously love each other very much. "And for some reason I thought on the trolleybus that your grandson was a boy, or a teenager," Helene confessed. "For me he is always small, even though he is already under 2 meters tall, and has long provided for himself," smiled the old lady. "What's the trouble with you?" She turned to Amelie. "Honey, you do not be shy. Tell me. You're a kind girl. You help me then. You are not indifferent." Maybe we can do something to help you." Amelie sighed. How could these people help her? She was faced with unsolvable problems, too difficult for her. And no one in the whole world could help her. Nevertheless, the girl suddenly realized that she really wanted to share her trouble with someone. Andrew and his grandmother will listen to her, that's for sure. And at least sympathize, pity. Amelie suddenly realized that all the time she had been hiding her worries from others. Even with her mother, she could not share her innermost feelings, because she had a heart condition, and she should not worry. And here they are, potential listeners, sitting next to each other, asking to open their souls. And that's exactly what Amelie needs right now. "So how will you finally tell me what happened to you?" the old lady asked again. "And you do not hurry," said Amelie. "My story is not too short." "We are in no hurry," the grandmother and grandson said together. "All right," Amelie nodded her head. "But I suggest that we settle somewhere nicer," said Andrew, looking around. "There seems to be a nice pizzeria over there. How about it?" "I'm in," immediately responded the old woman. "Me too," Amelie nodded, frantically trying to figure out how much money she had left on her card. Cozy atmosphere, stylish furniture, pleasant music. The interior of the pizzeria was conducive to conversation. Andrew, despite Amelie's objections, paid for the order himself. The company settled down at a table, hidden behind racks of fresh flowers. "Now tell us about your trouble," the old woman smiled, "and we'll think together how to help you." "Good," Amelie nodded, still puzzled as to why these people would listen to her, let alone help her. So what if she paid for an old lady on the trolleybus? It's nothing, it's not worth discussing. But if they asked for it? Amelie told them everything about her life alone with her mother in a tiny apartment, about the constant feeling of guilt for the illness of the dearest person, about the fear for the life and health of her mother, which she had experienced since a very young age. The girl mentioned Auberine as well, saying that it was to meet his parents that she rode that day on the trolleybus. Details of the behavior of the mother and father of the beloved did not report, limited only to the phrase that they made it clear that she was not a match for their son, and said that after that she broke up with her fiancé. This story did not have much to do with the case, but Amelie did not hold back. The parting with Auberine still tormented her. The girl did not tell anyone about her feelings and worries, and now suddenly there were attentive listeners. She shared with them what was still weighing on her soul, her disappointment in her beloved man. Rotten people. The old woman made a verdict. Not a good thing. Nothing good in their lives. They will not choose a wife for their grown-up son on a suitable lady. There will be no agreement between them. We've been there, we know. There are many such examples before our eyes. Life will not once again punish in your willful Auberine and his parents. Andrew said nothing. He looked at Amelie with such sympathy, with such participation that words were not needed. The girl felt the man's support and approval. It was a pleasant feeling. Then it was the turn of the story about her mother again. Amelie told about the reception at the famous professor and his verdict. And now her mother needed an expensive operation, and it was urgent. "I tried to find the money," Amelie continued. "I did everything I could. I even went to a colleague, but he thought I was a fraud. That's why I cried at the bus stop after talking to him." "What a fool," exclaimed the old woman in heart. "He doesn't understand people at all. I see you for the second time in my life, and I realize that you are a very honest and modest girl." Amelie continued. "And he's been seeing me for so long, and he hasn't realized anything." Auberine, whom this old woman didn't even know about, annoyed her a lot. It seemed funny if it weren't for the tragic nature of the situation. "Well, I can't get any money," Amelie summarized. "Without an operation. Mom. Mom." The girl still could not pronounce the terrible word, but the listeners already understood everything. The old woman put her arm around Amélie's shoulders and stroked her head. Amélie cried again. "But I can't help these silly tears," she continued. "I can't help it. It's the first time I've been listened to. It's the first time I've been sympathized with. That's worth a lot. But the trouble hasn't gone away. And the problems haven't just evaporated. Money didn't materialize out of thin air." The old woman soothed Amélie, whispering some comforting words that really did make her feel better. Andrew silently looked at this picture and clearly thought something. "How much money are we talking about?" finally asked the man. Amelie said the figures that made her panic. Andrew raised his eyebrows in surprise. "What did you think, grandson?" sighed the old woman. "These are the prices we have now. An ordinary person cannot get sick. And what, free of charge, this operation cannot be done?" asked Andrew. "You can," replied Amelie, which has already managed to cope with emotions not without the participation of a kind old lady. "For free you can wait in line for almost a year. Mom does not have that much time." "Well, I am ready to give such an amount for treatment," said Andrew. Grandma looked at her grandson with pride and approval. Ellen gawked her eyes in surprise. Andrew can give her such a sum. But he doesn't look like such a rich man at all. Dressed well, but not flashy. His car is nice, but not high-end like Oberon's. And anyway, how can you accept such a gift from a complete stranger? Amie's mind was buzzing. Well, how can she think about such details when her mom is slowly fading away without surgery? And lo and behold, still worried, anxious. Here is my edited version of the text. Amelie said cautiously, I'm afraid I can't accept such a sum. It doesn't seem right." "Everything is right and fair," assured the old lady. "You helped me in a difficult situation, and now Andrew is helping you. Boomerang, you've heard of it?" "The amounts are quite different." Amelie did not give up. "So?" The old lady didn't give up. "Who has what opportunities? Do not worry." Andrew smiled and covered Amelie's hand with his warm palm. A friendly, soothing gesture that made the girl feel lighter in her soul. "I do have such an opportunity. What's more, I spend a certain amount every year on charity. It's an ironclad rule." Amelie did not understand anything at all. If this Andrew is so rich, then why his grandmother did not have money for travel? "Andrew, I have a good boy. He is a successful businessman," proudly declared the old lady. "I raised him from a diaper. When his parents died, he was just a baby. I am not his own grandmother, even just a lonely neighbor. I couldn't bear the fact that my nice neighbor's child would end up in an orphanage. So I took him in, raised him like her own grandchild. And he was smart from a small age, serious beyond his years. I knew right away that the boy would go far. And he did." "Grandma does not miss a moment to brag about me," smiled Andrew. "But she's right. I really managed to build a business that brings a stable income. We make furniture to order. We already have many branches, and not only in our city. There's even a branch in Miami." "In Los Angeles," corrected the old lady, looking adoringly at her grandson. "Every year I spend a certain amount of money for charity. This year it should be your mom's. All the more, it seems that fate itself had arranged this meeting. What were the odds of bumping into you at the exact moment when you were sobbing with despair and helplessness at the bus stop? There's no such thing as coincidence. So, can you really give us that kind of money?" Ellen still couldn't believe his happiness. "But I can't just take it," said Amelie. "Let it be a receipt. I'll pay it back slowly. I'll pay it all back." "Oh, you're so stubborn." The old woman threw up her hands. "I understand that you are embarrassed," shook his head Andrew, looking carefully at Amelie. "I know people." He does. The grandmother confirmed her grandson's words. "In business, otherwise it is impossible. Let's do it this way. I have long wanted to invest in some new enterprise. We'll register an LLC for you. An atelier that makes custom-made clothes. From what I understand from your story, you're a talented dressmaker. The amount for your mom's treatment will be part of the investment in the company. And then, when this enterprise will begin to bring income, and it will definitely happen, I'm the one who knows about such things. You will gradually and give me this money as part of the profit due to the investor. I hope I've made myself clear?" Amelie nodded. What was happening was more and more like a fairy tale. The investment, the firm, the new interesting job, and most importantly, the money for her mom's surgery. Was this really happening in reality? Amelie was suddenly afraid that now she would wake up and it would turn out that she just saw a wonderful dream. But no, everything turned out to be true. Andrew and Amelie exchanged phone numbers, and his grandmother took Amelie's number too. "Call me when you're feeling down," the old lady said. "Don't disappear. You're a very nice person. It's interesting to talk to you." And somehow it all spun up quickly. Amelie's life was changing from day to day. These changes even made her a little dizzy. First, Amelie's mom was sent to Chicago for surgery. Andrew not only paid for the necessary medical procedures, but also organized everything down to the last detail. He bought the tickets, arranged for rent for Amelie in Chicago, arranged a comfortable room for her mother, found all the rare drugs on the list. Amelie couldn't have done it on her own, especially not so fast. Andrew solved all problems as if at the snap of his fingers. He was an amazing man, Andrew. He didn't talk a lot, only business. Unlike his grandmother, he turned out to be a rather silent man. Often Andrew and Amelie would drive together on business, and both would be silent. Just silence. It wasn't oppressive, it wasn't uncomfortable. The girl felt waves of warmth and acceptance coming from Andrew. She was perfectly aware that she was falling in love with him. Of course she was, he was the perfect man. Except that the girl, every time she had such thoughts, restrained herself. Andrew. He probably has a soulmate. The man is not married. There is no wedding ring on his finger, but of course he is not free. Of course his chosen one is also ideal, some beauty of model appearance, with a pure soul and impeccable manners. Where can Amelie get to such a one? She thought. So Amelie only had to dream from time to time that one day Andrew will pay attention to her as a girl. Only these dreams seemed to be unfulfilled. For 2 weeks, while her mother was recovering in the hospital after a serious operation, Amelie spent in Chicago. Every day she visited her parents, brought her treats, cheered up her mom. The doctor said the surgery was a success, and added that the patient had managed to jump on the last carriage of the departing train. Just a little bit more, and, in short, Andrew and his grandmother met just in time. Andrew's grandmother was always in touch. She asked Amelie about her mother's health, rejoiced together with the girl obvious improvements. She also told her what places to visit in her free time in Chicago, wherever Amelie had been during that time. She had seen everything. It was very exciting, as the girl had never been in Chicago before. Andrew also often called, but the nature of conversations with him was rather businesslike. The man was engaged in registration of a new LLC of the firm, the director and chief master of which was to become Amelie. This slightly worried the girl. Will she be able to cope? She was perfectly capable of inventing new models and sewing. This is her real vocation. It was great that she would finally have the opportunity to earn money doing something she really liked, something that inspired her. The girl had long felt that she was burying her talent in the ground, working in an attire as a simple dressmaker. Fitting things to the figure, it's quite different from sewing outfits to order. That's where the imagination runs wild. But now you have to get into the paperwork. Amelie will be the director and co-owner of the firm. She'll be fine. The main thing is that Mom was saved. Now Amelie will do everything to make the firm flourish, and Andrew did not regret his decision. She will give him the entire amount, even more. As time passed, Mom got stronger and was discharged. Mother and daughter returned home, full of plans and hopes for a new life. Mom went back to work. Now she didn't need to take sick day after sick day. She looked like a young, healthy, energetic woman again. Amelie, on the other hand, had plunged headlong into her new firm. The work was addictive, inspiring, and joyful. The girl could not be happy with what she was doing now. Andrew helped her with documents and legal issues. He did not even need to ask. He was like some kind of inner instinct, felt when and where there are problems, and solved them easily and playfully, as he always did. Amelie struggled with herself, trying not to betray her feelings for Andrew. He saved her in a difficult and seemingly hopeless situation. Of course, the role of savior, and caused in Amelie romantic feelings. But did Andrew need it? Hardly. He is just a good man who could not pass by the offended Amelie, giving money at the bus stop, thought the girl, especially since he had the means to help her. And he's also a businessman who decided to try a new project in a tire where they sew custom-made clothes. This is a potential source of good profit. That's why the man got involved. That's all. Andrew was serious, silent, even a little sullen. Looking at him, It was hard to imagine how kind and sensitive he was. With his subordinates, he spoke sometimes harshly and aloofly, especially not getting close to anyone. One day he told Amelie about his life. It happened one evening when they sat up late for a report. Andrew had lost his parents at an early age in a fire in the wooden house where they all lived together. The fire had started. A vigilant neighbor, the same old lady from the bus, called the fire department in time. They arrived quickly, but the wooden building burst into flames like a matchbox. By the time they arrived, it had burned to the ground. Andrew was lucky, then his mother put him to sleep in a stroller in the yard in the fresh air. Meanwhile, she herself was doing things in the kitchen, which was immediately cut off from the exit by fire. Father was repairing the attic and didn't get out either. The house was old. The wiring should have been replaced a long time ago, and the windows had bars left by the previous owners. Andrew's parents were trapped, but he himself was unharmed. The boy was taken in by the very neighbor who raised the alarm. She loved Andrew's parents. More than once she told the boy that they were very good and hard-working guys. Both from orphanages, both smart and focused on success. They would have achieved a lot in life, if not for the damn fire, complained sometimes guardian Andrew. You have to live for 3 and realize all the plans and hopes of your parents. And Andrew tried very hard to be the kind of man that his mother and father would be proud of. He always studied well. Study was given to him easily. There was time for walks and for extra classes. The boy early demonstrated that his hands grow from where they should. Even in childhood, Andrew himself learned to make simple furniture. And when he was only 11 years old, he and a couple of friends went to the bypass road to sell what he had made himself. The chairs and tables quickly sold out. People bought simple furniture for the garden, for the cottage. Andrew then even received the first orders. Slowly, little by little, established his business. Andrew opened his own production. By the end of school, he already had his own company with hired workers, regular suppliers, and buyers. Everything as it should be, but unofficially, because Andrew remained a minor. But the money he got quite real. Then the guy easily entered the local economic university. He specifically chose such a direction to know how to properly and officially conduct their business. Well, at one point I decided to legalize my mini firm, smiled Andrew, remembering those times. It worked. Furthermore, we grew, developed, opened branches, and now I own my own mini empire. After this story, Amelie had even more respect for Andrew. What a man. He himself rose from the bottom, went all the way from homemade furniture to a network of furniture production. That's great. Amelie's feelings for Andrew did not fade. On the contrary, they flared up day by day. Outwardly calm and even stern Andrew. No one knew how kind and considerate he really is. Lucky his girlfriend Amelie thought. I wonder what she is like. And how does she feel about the fact that her beloved literally disappears 24 hours a day at work? That his furniture mini empire is engaged in his new project Atelier. Amelie gradually became a keen businesswoman. Now she understood a lot of things, and almost all issues were solved by herself without the help of Andrew. The girl even realized her long-standing dream of driving. She passed the license and bought a new car in the salon. Not expensive foreign car, but quite a good and reliable car. Amelie was a very careful driver, but unfortunately not everything depends on a single road user. Racers and daredevils are not cancelled. There are plenty of them everywhere. One day Amelie was caught up with such a rule breaker. It happened right at an intersection. The airbag didn't deploy for some reason. Amelie hit her head on the steering wheel, no harm done, but she cut her forehead. An ambulance arrived at the scene and took her to the city hospital. She needed a few stitches. Amelie sat in the treatment room while the doctor worked on her forehead. The girl did not feel any pain. All she could think about was how badly her favorite car had been damaged. When the wrecker was taking the car away, Amelie didn't have time to see the damage, but it was obviously more serious than her own small injury. After the doctor finished his work, the girl was lifted into the room. Can I go now? I just have a lot to do at work today. I feel fine, she turned to the doctor. No, the doctor shook his head. You'll have to spend 24 hours in the hospital. We have to rule out a concussion. Amelie was frankly bored in her single room. She didn't intend to go to the hospital, so she hadn't even brought a book. At least she could read now. And so there was only the phone. The girl told her mom that she was spending the night at a friend's house. She didn't tell her about the accident. Amelie was used to protect her mother from stress, although her mother's health now did not cause any concern. Amelie lay on the bed, leafing through the news feed, when the door of the room rattled open. Standing on the threshold was Andrew, his hair disheveled, anxiety in his eyes. Seeing Amelie staring at him in surprise from the bed, he jumped up to her and hugged her tightly. "I was so afraid of losing you." Warmth went through the girl's body from these sincere words of Andrew. He cared about her. Wow. Amelie pressed herself against him with pleasure. She had been dreaming about this for so long. "I was afraid that there was something serious with you." Andrew pulled back a little and looked into the girl's eyes. "Video in the local Publix, your mangled car. Got the license plate. It says the driver was taken to the hospital in serious condition. I don't think I could not without you." "I'm fine," Amelie smiled. It was exaggerated on purpose to make it more interesting for people to read. "It's just a scratch on my forehead. The doctor put in a couple of stitches. That's nothing." Andrew smiled back. "Well, now it seems there's no point in hiding it," he said. "I didn't tell you anything, because you were, well, kind of dependent on me. I didn't want to embarrass you," Andrew admitted. "I myself do not know at what point I have feelings for you. Maybe when you told us about your trouble at the pizzeria, or maybe when we organized your mother's treatment together with Auburn. I don't know, but I've never met anyone so sincere, honest, and beautiful. Today, when I heard about the accident, I was so afraid I'd lost you forever. It's such a fear. I've never experienced that before." Amelie smiled. She will find the words to tell Andrew how she feels, but a little later. Surely he himself can see everything in her eyes. Andrew is smart, and he has a keen sense of people. "Well, now you are in the same situation as your grandmother once," Amelie smiled. "Remember, she said at the bus stop that someday you would understand her, that you would realize how scared you were for your loved ones. And that's what happened." And it's true, and Andrew's eyes lit up a cheerful light. The situation is very similar. Grandma, as always, was right, and so in everything. A teacher rescued an orphan boy, and a short time later found herself on the street. Pete leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. He stayed late at the office, reviewing reports on the financial status of his restaurants. He had a whole chain of them now. The numbers were encouraging. Business was booming, not without problems, of course. Often there were various incidents that had to be regulated and cleaned up. That's business, but in general the restaurants flourished, which of course could not help but encourage. Who'd have thought it? Years ago, Pete was starving, dreaming of a portion of fries and a patty, a piece of chocolate cake, a glass of milkshake with foam. And now he's feeding half the town on his own. Yeah, life's a director. Pete's really rich now, big business, bank accounts. He can afford to travel anywhere in the world, expensive cars, clothes from famous designers. True, here are the trappings of a luxurious life. All this tinsel is not for him. Most importantly, the man now does not need help, he helps himself. It is so nice to be able to make someone a little happier. Pete regularly transfers money to foundations that raise money for the treatment of people, and of course sponsors several orphanages. Most of these institutions are located in New York, where Pete has been living for more than 20 years. The man does not ignore the orphanage in Sandersville. Sandersville is a small provincial town. Dusty streets with broken sidewalks, weedy squares overgrown with weeds. It's a place of desolation and tranquility. It's where Pete spent his childhood. The man often reminisces about his early years, sometimes intentionally, sometimes not. Pictures from the past sometimes rise up before his eyes by themselves. Pete doesn't chase these memories away. On the contrary, he likes to think about the fact that he was able to get out of the pit, to stand, to survive, to become strong. In addition, his own story does not let him forget that there are many boys and girls in the world who need support and attention. His children's son and daughter are already old enough to talk to them about serious things. Andrew is in the 8th grade. Jessica is a year younger. Pete has long since told them about his life. At their age, he had a hard time. Children need to know that the world is not equally fair and kind to everyone. Both Andrew and Jessica are lucky. Everything comes easy to them, so to speak, by birthright. But that doesn't mean that others are doing the same. Son and daughter are well aware of how many disadvantaged children in the world and empathize with these people. That especially pleases their father. Andrew sometimes travels to orphanages together with Pete. They see everything, know everything, and even created their own group and social networks to help orphaned children. They collect clothes, toys. Good guys. Pete was afraid that he would spoil his heirs too much, and he didn't want his son and daughter to turn into soulless snobs. Such a fate often awaited the children of wealthy parents. Pete had seen enough of such offspring. Permissiveness, indifference to other people's misfortune, confidence that the world revolves only around them. It's a sight to behold. Pete did his best to make Andrew and Jessica grow up sensitive, empathetic, attentive. And he was succeeding. They were doing it. His wife, Esmeralda, supported him in everything he did. They've known each other for years, almost a lifetime. Esmeralda also grew up in an orphanage. The girl was abandoned in the maternity hospital after she was born. Quiet, shy, unrequited, just like Pete. She'd long been the butt of local leaders' jokes, a punching bag. A person to assert herself, take out her frustrations on. Pete was the same way. He tried not to run into the guys, lived in constant fear, flinched at every rustle or loud sound. He had become strong for her sake, for Esmeralda's sake. He could not stand up for himself, but it was also unbearable to see this girl, who was quiet in her big eyes, being insulted. They became friends with Esmeralda. At first they played together, discussed some problems and worries. Both of them had no one to share their joys and sorrows with, but in each other they saw attentive interlocutors, support, and acceptance. Later, somehow imperceptibly, all this grew into romantic feelings. And then Pete's life changed abruptly. From the miserable orphanage with its gray, shabby walls, stinking mattresses, and scanty porridge in the morning, he suddenly found himself in a completely different world. No, Pete wasn't adopted. He was a teenager at the time. Who wants one of those? People prefer to adopt cute little babies. That's not what happened. Pete lived with a family until he was 9, and it was a wonderful family. The man's heart still ached when he thought of his parents. It's a shame they can't see what their son has accomplished. Too bad Pete couldn't do something nice for them. He had a lot of money now, and fulfilling his mother and father's dreams wasn't a problem for him. Dad kept talking about a new car because the old 6 was always breaking down. Mom wanted to go to the sea. She had been to the resort only once and now dreamed of repeating this trip. Except that they'd been gone for over 30 years. Pete and his family didn't live poorly, but they were never poor. They had a clean, cozy one-bedroom apartment in which the young heir was allocated a whole room. There was an old car. On it, my father took the whole family to the river, then in the woods. These were wonderful trips, even if not to the sea. Pete never went hungry. Yes, sometimes there was not enough money for candy or ice cream, but there was always a pot of borscht or goulash in the refrigerator. Mom worked as a painter. Dad worked at the factory and the shop. There was enough money to live on. We didn't live poorly, but we weren't poor. Pete didn't think about such things at all then. He enjoyed life, a quiet, sunny childhood, socializing with his parents and friends. His mother and father never quarreled. At least Pete didn't remember that. They never raised their voices at their son either, even if he did something wrong. His parents always talked to Pete like an adult, always explained the consequences of his behavior, told him what excessive carelessness could lead to. Pete, in turn, tried not to upset them. He studied well and did not bully. Attitude is more important than anything else in this world, his father had said many times. We have no one else, only us. And that's why it's important for us to protect each other. Pete liked those conversations. He saw their family as a close-knit team. Mom, Dad, Pete, they were each other's rock. It was wonderful to have that kind of support behind him. Pete learned that both his parents had grown up in an orphanage. Sometimes one of them would tell stories about those years. Pete listened to these stories with his mouth open. Mom and Dad's childhood was very different from his own. Different teachers, angry children, a life of starvation. And no one, absolutely no one, cared about these boys and girls. Pete was glad that he lived with loving and understanding parents. Then the boy could not imagine that one day he himself would end up in an orphanage. He could not have dreamed of such a thing. He has a mom and dad, they love him very much. And for complete happiness, he lacked grandparents. Many friends had them, and it's great to drink tea with grandmother's cakes, to go fishing with his grandfather. But what can you do? That's life. But his parents are the best. Pete remembered that warm summer day forever. He still sometimes dreamed of flying on his scooter into his hometown yard through the archway. The cool gloom was replaced by bright sunlight and heat. The smell of heated grass hits his nose. Next to me is Lexi, a loyal friend and comrade. They've been sitting at the same desk since first grade. Lexi laughs, talking about something. And Pete. He immediately notices the crowd of neighbors outside his driveway, and his tiny heart clenches with misgivings. Pete still could not understand how he, 9 years old, at first sight then guessed that his parents are in trouble. The boy suddenly wanted to see his mom or dad. Right now, as it usually happens, they would dispel his fears. But his parents had gone to the village in the morning to buy meat. They often visited the local collective farm. The products there were fresh, real, useful. That's what Mom said. Pete often went with them, and he loved these mini vacations. Sitting in the back seat, looking at the road, and there were all fields and hills. It's picturesque. Mother and father are quietly talking about something, making plans. It's nice, peaceful. There's a lot of interesting things in the village itself. Even the smell is different there. Mom always wrinkles her nose, says, "It smells like manure, but Pete likes it for some reason." There are a lot of animals in the village: horses, cows, and goats. It's a common thing for the local kids. And Pete always looked at these animals, opening his eyes in amazement. But that day, the boy stayed home. Lexi suggested scooters at the new park. There are special paths and a fountain recently opened. How could he resist? The parents didn't mind. They always took their son's opinion into account, even when he was a baby. "All right, stay home, if you want," Mom said with a smile and brushed Pete's hair back. "We'll bring you something good to eat," Dad promised, sitting down in the driver's seat. Pete nodded happily. He and Lexi saw their parents off together, standing in the driveway, and of course at the time he couldn't even think about seeing them for the last time. The boy waved goodbye to them, and then headed off with his friend to adventure. It was a wonderful day. Pete and Lexi had a lot of fun riding on the new paths, getting to know the local kids. Splashing in the fountain, their friends had time to climb trees, play with a stray dog, and chase pigeons. It was fun. Summer vacation is the best time. So it was until the moment that divided the boy's life into before and after. The change began at the moment when Pete noticed the neighbors in his driveway. These people, familiar from his earliest childhood, looked anxious, worried, confused. They were discussing something. Lexi hadn't noticed them yet. She kept telling Pete a joke, but he wasn't listening. The boy's attention was on the neighbors. He desperately wanted to see his mom or dad among them. They should have been back by now. But his parents weren't there, which was scary for some reason. It was really scary. Even his palms were sweating, and goosebumps ran down his back. Finally, one of the neighbors noticed Pete and Lexi. He said something to the others, and now there were about a dozen pairs of eyes staring at the friends. Immediately, the boy felt a large shiver begin to hit him. The first to hug Pete was Aunt Stacy, his mom's friend. She often came to their house for tea, and always brought something tasty for the master's son. "Trouble," she said, looking into the boy's eyes. "There is trouble, terrible trouble. You must be strong." Neighbors told Pete that his father had lost control of the car, and the car at high speed went into the ditch. There was a pothole in the road. It hadn't been there before, but it was hard to see it right away. The fault of the road service. Now the dangerous area has been fenced off, no one else will get hurt. But Pete's parents died in that terrible accident. Both of them. That was a hard thing to realize. It's even harder to accept. How could it be? Mother and father were something fundamental, something unshakable. Pete even lost consciousness for a while. He woke up at Aunt Stacy's. She was home in time to call an ambulance. The doctors came and gave the boy some kind of injection. Everyone looked at Pete with sympathy, stroked his head, hugged him. That made it even scarier. The boy did not think about his future. He was in a very strange state. Everything around him suddenly faded, somehow slowed down. Pete saw the world as if from the outside, as if he was just an observer, not a participant in this life. The neighbors took care of the funeral. Pete was staying with Aunt Stacy. He didn't want to go home. It was scary to walk into an empty apartment with no mom and dad. Aunt Stacy had sent the kids to her mother-in-law's for a while. And she must have taken time off work, because Aunt Stacy was always with Pete, never leaving him for a minute. Aunt Stacy often cried when she thought the boy couldn't see or hear her. Next to Pete, she tried to speak in a cheerful voice, even sort of smiling. It looked unnatural. The boy didn't make it to his parents' funeral. They saw them off on their last journey, only friends and neighbors. Pete had a hysteria the night before. He screamed, sobbed, convulsed, which incredibly frightened not only Aunt Stacy, but also himself. The boy would have liked to calm down, but he just couldn't. They took him to the hospital, gave him some pills, gave him some shots, and everything around him became unimportant. Pete lay on the bed and stared up at the white hospital ceiling. Not a very exciting thing for a boy to do. But it didn't seem that way to Pete at the time. A few days passed, the boy seemed to come to his senses. Neighbors were allowed to visit him. In the hospital courtyard, the boy sat on a bench between Aunt Stacy and Aunt Esmeralda. Both had their arms around his shoulders. Across from him stood more people from their home. They were all sad, even gloomy. "You'll have to stay at the orphanage for a while," Aunt Stacy said at last, her voice trembling. "We'll visit you," Aunt Esmeralda added. Pete shuddered. Until now, he hadn't thought about where and with whom he would live. There was too much on his mind at once. And now, hearing the phrase orphanage, the boy was alarmed, frightened. How could it be? His mom and dad had grown up in an orphanage. They had said many times that their son was very lucky to be born in a family. And now he would have to go to an institution like this. Tears came to the boy's eyes. He tried to force them inside, but nothing worked. Neighbors calmed him down, promised to visit him and even take him to their homes for the weekend, if the management of the orphanage allowed it. But Pete realized then, at the age of 9, sitting on a bench in the hospital courtyard, he realized that now he was alone, all alone, no more of their wonderful team. From now on, he would have to make his own way. Something told the boy that it would be difficult. He had to pull himself together, prepare for a long struggle. But at the time, he had no idea what he'd be up against. Looking ahead, it should be said that the neighbors did visit the boy. At first, Aunt Stacy came most often, always dressed up, always with goodies, hugging Pete, asking him about his life. But then these visits became more and more infrequent and finally came to nothing. The boy was not offended. He understood everything perfectly. After all, he had to grow up sharply. People have their own affairs, their own worries. Not to the neighbor's boy their own problems to deal with. Pete was taken from the hospital by 2 women, one in a police uniform, the other in ordinary clothes. They did not talk to the boy, did not explain anything to him, only gave him dry orders: get in the car, get out. The orphanage at first glance resembled an ordinary kindergarten, which Pitye had visited not so long ago. The same long 3-story building, the same green yard with playgrounds. The policewoman, having signed some papers, left. But the second escort took Pete inside. The boy was shown how everything was organized in the orphanage: several bedrooms with modest beds, a dining room, a playroom, and classrooms. The orphanage was outside the city, so the children did not go to a regular school. Teachers came to visit them themselves. On the first day, Pete was beaten up by local boys just to show who was in charge and stronger. The girls saw this and giggled gloatingly. Then, when the teacher came to the noise, looking her in the eyes, these girls said that the newcomer himself fell down the stairs, when Pete also received from the teacher for carelessness. "You're good, you didn't complain and fight," one of the attackers said afterwards. "I did the right thing. We would have beaten you up even more for that." Pete didn't say anything. He didn't say anything to the teacher out of fear of incurring more anger. Certainly not out of a desire to keep his tormentors out of trouble. The woman just didn't care. She wouldn't help Pete in any way. There was no help to be had here at all. A hostile and evil world. The gray orphan days dragged on. It was hard to get used to it all. Instead of a small but own room, a bedroom for 20 bunks. instead of mom's delicious homemade food and incomprehensible brew. Instead of acceptance and soulful conversations, complete indifference, at best indifference, or even anger and aggression. There were no friends here, no attentive neighbors. Pete was immediately disliked. He'd been a homeschooled child for 9 years. He'd been loved, pampered, cared for. And these children, most of them, had never known the comfort of home and the love of family. They all had hard fates and believed that those more fortunate were now their eternal debtors. Pete couldn't stand up to this bitterness, not yet at that time. He was shocked by the behavior of his peers. The world was opening up from a completely different perspective. Everything was out of whack. He had to adapt. Pete was often beaten, and it was impossible to predict what would come next time. The boy tried to stay out of sight of his abusers. But how can you do that if you have to sleep in the same bedroom with them every night? Pete was doused with water, tripped over, called names, insulted, spit on, thrown things at, and had to endure it all. Pete tried to make friends with these kids. Not that he liked them, not at all. He just wanted to make his life a little more peaceful and pleasant. But it wasn't working. He and these guys, they were like different species. They had no common ground, no common themes. The boys from the orphanage were bitter and understood only the language of force. They were very different from Pete's friends, like Tom or Jake. Pete realized later that life had made them like that. As an adult, strong and wealthy, he began to help orphanages. If the underprivileged boys and girls realized that at least someone cared, if they saw help, kindness, sympathy, maybe some of them would think that the world is not only aggression and anger. Pete really wanted to hope so. The man was glad that since the time of his childhood, many things in orphanages had become different. And when the favorite happy child had to adapt to a new life in an accelerated mode, schooling had begun. With surprise and annoyance, Pete realized that the lessons here are purely formal. The level of preparation of his classmates was incredibly low. Of course, Pete, who had always studied well, showed his abilities on the first day of school. It didn't happen on purpose. His classmates could not cope with the simplest tasks. They could barely read. Pete was very praised by the teacher. Finally, a smart student, it's a pleasure to work with him, rejoiced Annie Smith. Pete smiled. He liked that he was finally noticed, that they were saying good things about him. But that very evening, he was noticed by a crowd of boys in the backyard. The girls, as always, watched from a distant distance and silently approved. "Here's to you, upstart," said the boys. "You think you're the smartest? Don't show off." Pete was hurt, offended, scared. But he learned his lesson well. He didn't shine his knowledge in class anymore. He kept quiet. He made mistakes on his tests on purpose, just so he wouldn't be praised anymore, just so he wouldn't stand out, just so he wouldn't stand out. Esmeralda was Pete's classmate. She didn't belong to any group of girls, and was friends only with the same quiet girls she was. These girls were often the objects of cruel jokes from their peers. The boys didn't touch them, usually preferring to deal with their own. But Pete quickly realized that girls could sometimes be even more cruel than boys. They made up insults for Esmeralda and her friends that would make people's ears perk up. They also spoiled their belongings, made them take their place on duty, and took away the treats the children were occasionally given in the dining hall. Sometimes there were scuffles with girls in the yard with bites, torn hair, and broken noses. The educators looked the other way. They preferred not to delve into children's conflicts, separated and punished everyone. But some teenagers were simply feared by adults, knew about these children's past and guessed what they were capable of. It was easier for them to lock quiet Esmeralda in a closet for 24 hours than to deal with those who bullied. Pete had been locked up in that closet more than once for nothing, if that's what it took. But he even liked it there, quiet, dark, calm, no one yanking him around, calling him to get out, calling him names. Just sit there and think. One bad thing, hunger quickly began to pester the growing body. Life in the orphanage was half-starved as it was, and then there was punishment. But Pete eventually got used to it. As the years passed, Pete and Esmeralda had already become firm friends, already even began to show between them romantic feelings. The homeboy had changed. He became stronger, more resilient, learned to fight back. And it was all thanks to Esmeralda. It was unbearable to watch a crowd of girls bullying her. Then in the corner she is squeezed and start pinching. Then forced to duty in the kitchen every day. Then she has to wash their socks in the bathroom. a whole mountain of socks. But he couldn't take it. Pete saw the girls kicking the unrequited Esmeralda again one day, and he stood up for her. He knew exactly what he was doing. The girls were taken aback at first, and then they started laughing. Not laughing. One of them, the strongest and toughest, pushed Pete against the wall. The blow was hard enough, but the boy stood his ground and pushed her back. Actually, of course, you can't hit girls. Pete had learned that in his past life when he was in kindergarten. But in front of him now was not a girl, but a monster, unpleasant, angry and ruthless. The girls, accustomed to resolving conflicts by swearing and fighting, pounced on Pete. But even though he was a puny boy, still a boy, he fought back quite well, and at the same time he understood perfectly well that the girls would call for help from the boys. It would be more difficult with them. Pete had been practicing hammering his fists with a flour sack in the closet for a long time, secretly from everyone. This bag replaced his punching bag. He did push-ups, pull-ups. He had to accept the rules of the game. If in this world the strongest survives, what does it mean to become the strongest? "Fool, you'll be in trouble now," warned one of the girls, the recognized leader of the company. The ladies realized that they could not overpower the boy and proudly withdrew. Pete knew exactly what their threats meant. They would tell their buddies. They would take revenge on Pete for his courage. Trouble did loom ahead. But Esmeralda looked at him as a savior, as a hero, and all distant problems under that gaze somehow faded, lost importance. "Thank you," she whispered quietly. "But what about you now? They'll get you, won't they?" Nothing. Pete waved his hand. "I'm not afraid of them." And at that moment he really wasn't afraid of reprisals. He didn't care. What mattered was that Esmeralda was looking at him in a special way and smiling. They sat together on the bench for a long time afterward and chatted about this and that, learning new things about each other. It turned out that Esmeralda's mother had died in the maternity hospital. She seemed to be a very young girl. The relatives didn't want to take the baby. It was an embarrassment to them. So Esmeralda lived from infancy in children's institutions. Apparently, such a fate of a granddaughter, in the opinion of relatives, was not a disgrace. That was her story. Of course, payback caught up with Pete very soon. "Are you the coolest guy in the world now?" was the question one of his attackers asked him. The question was, of course, purely rhetorical. Of course, Pete was beaten, and badly. The girls were nearby. They suggested to their defenders ways to humiliate the victim, one more sophisticated than the other. But that time Pete still fought back. He managed to break a couple of noses, kick someone in the stomach, and then found himself in the dust on the ground. And he was the only one who got hit. But still the boys were surprised. Before, the victim was wordless and toothless, and then suddenly it was like this. He was less likely to be touched. No one wanted to get punched in the teeth or nose by a mob. And there was the occasional one-on-one attack. No, not anymore. Pete sighed, stretched, turned off the computer. Time to go home. Tomorrow he could sleep in a little longer, spend time with his family. The man threw on his coat, walked out of the office. His car was parked in the back of the restaurant. Where the garbage cans stood, food that customers got fed up with was thrown into them. So homeless people who wanted to satisfy their hunger often hung around here. Pete wasn't surprised to see an elderly woman in tattered clothes and shot sneakers, clearly off someone else's foot, standing next to the bins. Pete didn't chase the homeless away from the bins. On the contrary, he asked the staff to leave the food in the containers on the site, not to throw it all in the bucket. He felt sorry for these destitute people. Poor thing, he thought. But the woman, smelling the presence of a man, was frightened, shuddered, turned around. She looked anxiously at him. Pete was dumbfounded. This old woman? No, such a thing is simply impossible. She was very much like the man who had once played a pivotal role in his life. The man gazed intently into the poor woman's face. The woman also looked at him studyingly. After a few years of surviving in the orphanage, an amazing thing happened in Pete's life. A new English teacher, Laurel Swan, came to visit. The class, as always, began to test her on the first day. Mean jokes, attempts to disrupt the lesson, even direct insults. Usually the teachers either lost it or lost their temper. But Laurel Swan looked at the troublemakers with sadness and even pity. It was amazing. Pete, who who, as always, was ashamed of his classmates, watched Laurel Swan with interest. This was an unusual person, it was immediately felt. The new teacher had an interesting lesson. She didn't torture the class with the necessary rules, but turned on cartoons in English. The pupils at first, out of habit, only tried to make jokes, but somehow they got involved. Even the most disinterested in learning bullies. Then Laurel Swan began to ask questions. Pete, to his own surprise, knew all the answers. As he answered, the teacher shook her head approvingly and smiled. She seemed to be impressed by the able pupil. She hadn't expected to find such a one here. Pete was no longer afraid of being pushed and taunted by the local bullies, so he answered as he saw fit. "You're an amazingly talented boy," she praised Pete when the others had left. And he realized that the teacher purposely did not shower him with compliments in front of his classmates so as not to arouse their envy. What an intelligent and sensitive person Pete thought. "Thank you," said the embarrassed and delighted Pete. It had been a long time since anyone had been so attentive to him. "Tomorrow I'll bring you some textbooks to study with the kids. What about you? You should be interested in something else," Laurel said. And indeed, the next lesson she brought a bright, colorful textbook. There were many fascinating stories in the form of comics. "We will repeat the material with the students for now," said the teacher. "You don't need it. Read it and tell me if you understand it," Laurel Swan said to Pete. Pete delved into the reading. The bright pictures were pleasing to the eye. The boy was engrossed in the story, and he didn't notice how the lesson flew by. "Did you understand anything?" Laurel Swan leaned over the desk with a smile. "I understood everything, but I didn't have time to finish it. Too bad." "Interesting," Pete said. "Take the book with you. You'll have time to read it." "Yeah, you do? I bought it for my daughter, but she didn't seem interested." "Let it serve someone," the teacher added. Laurel Swan made Pete's life happier and more pleasant, gave it a special meaning, and the other children liked her a lot too. It was a rare teacher who interacted with the class not through humiliation and insults, but through explanations, frank conversations on the heart. Both girls and boys were drawn to her. But it was obvious to everyone that Laurel Swan was Pete's favorite. But there were no objections. The classmates saw that Pete was making great progress in English. He helped them too. He never said no to anyone, even the ones who had recently beaten him up in the backyard. Pete devoured one after another of the interesting English books Laurel Swan brought him. Then the teacher handed the boy a player with several CDs. "Reading is one thing," she said. "You could use some listening too. English is a little hard to listen to, but you'll do fine. I know." "Thank you," Pete said, but he looked at the player with doubt. "It's expensive. There's no guarantee that the boys won't take it away from me. I'm afraid I can't take it." Laurel Swan seemed to understand. "I'll make a deal with the principal," she said. "He'll let you into the classrooms after school at certain hours when no one is here. That's where you'll study. Is that all right with you?" "Of course it is," Pete exclaimed. It was so nice to do something he loved and enjoyed in the silence of an empty classroom. It was not only learning English, but also a great opportunity to be alone with himself. This privacy Pete really lacked in the orphanage. And this is beautiful. Pete often talked to Laurel Swan about more than just English. They had become almost real friends. Pete told his teacher about his tragedy. It was so nice to share moments from the past with someone. The woman shook her head, sighing from time to time. "Oh, you've had a hard time, Pete," she said. Not always the conversations between the teacher and the able pupil were so heavy and serious. Sometimes they laughed and joked, sometimes they discussed the news, sometimes they argued, and sometimes they were happy to find that they agreed. Esmeralda liked Laurel Swan too, but she was shy of the teacher. A girl of that age in general was afraid of everyone and everything. Pete saw that life in the orphanage had a negative effect on Esmeralda. Kind and sensitive by nature, she couldn't stand the pressure. At least now Esmeralda had him, Pete. He wouldn't let her get hurt. One day Laurel Swan suggested Pete enter a regional competition. He had to write an essay in English, decorate it with drawings, and send it to New York. "Why, you've got a great imagination and a high level of language skills. You'll do great," said the teacher. Well, I don't know. Pete hesitated. Who is he? A kid from the orphanage. The other kids are homeschooled. They go abroad and tutor. How can he compare to them? I know, said Laurel Swan confidently. All you will succeed. What's there to write about? Pete asked. The theme is summer vacation. Describe the perfect day of your happiest vacation. I think that would be good. Pete thought for a moment. He knew right away what kind of day he would write about. Mom and Dad were still with him then. They both had the day off. They got up early, got in the car, and drove into the woods to get mushrooms. That day they saw a deer up close. The deer jumped out onto the road, gave the men a worried look, even trembled. And then suddenly, as if it realized that these people were not dangerous. By some inner instinct the deer guessed, and just went about its business. It began to nibble the grass, letting them admire themselves. It was a real miracle. All three of them froze, watching the cute animal. Then there was a wonderful picnic in the woods. Mom made her signature pies with onions and eggs, which Pete loved so much. We picked a lot of mushrooms. In the evening, Dad fried potatoes with them. Adrian showed up at the smell. He lived one floor down, and he knew what was coming. "And here you are, you lazybones," he exclaimed. All three of them started talking about Adrian. "Will you take me next time?" the boy asked with hope in his eyes. "Of course we will," his father promised. And that was today too. Should I take you with me? Well, did not guess something. But the promised joint trip never happened. Instead, Pete ended up in an orphanage. I wonder how Lexi is doing now. All grown up, I guess. Does he still remember his childhood friend, Pete thought. At that moment, he didn't know and couldn't know that not only had Lexi not forgotten him, but he was trying to make his way back to him. But it was difficult. The orphanage and its grounds were behind a high, blank fence. In addition, the site itself was located far away from the city. Lexi was just a kid. Still, he had come to the gate several times and begged the guard to let him in, or at least to send word to his friend. The guard invariably turned the boy away. Of course, he never sent any message to Pete. Juvenile visits were not allowed. Lexi's parents were going through a divorce and couldn't handle their son's requests. He begged them to go to Pete's with him, but to no avail. "I don't have time," they said. And then, when the parents took pity on Lexi, well, how did they take pity? It was just a fight over who the son loved more. During this period, each parent tried to fulfill Lexi's every wish. Anyway, Lexi's dad called the orphanage to arrange a date. But Pete was no longer there. He was transferred to another place. And all thanks to Laurel Swan, her faith in a talented student. Pete learned all of this later, when Lexi found an old friend on social media. They met as if the years apart had never happened. Lexi is still Pete's best friend, reliable, loyal, always there for him. Laurel Swan insisted. Pete took the essay. It was a passion for the boy. It was so nice to remember that happy day. Esmeralda helped her friend and took care of the design. Pete was not much of a draftsman, but she was very good at it. Esmeralda drew a deer so cute, and most importantly, so remarkably similar to the deer Pete had once seen. "I've never been in the woods," she smiled sadly. "We'll go for a walk with you. When we grow up, will we get out of here? I wish we could. Maybe life will be better later." "It will be. I've lived there. It's really nice there," Pete said. He was still surprised that Esmeralda had spent her whole life in those walls and had no idea what most people were like. Well, she would have a pleasant surprise when she left the orphanage. The essay won the prize and went to the all-Russian stage of the contest. Only this stage was not absentee. It was required to come to New York in person. The format was as follows: each participant goes on stage and receives a task from the jury to compose a story on a certain topic. You have to orient yourself lightning fast, improvise, fantasize. "You can do it. You can definitely do it," Laurel Swan excitedly paced the class. "You can win. I know you can. And the prize is a ticket to the future. Free education in a boarding school for gifted children. It's a really worthwhile institution. If you get there, you're lucky, and that's it. You'll become a successful person. Graduates from there are supervised and guided. First, the most prestigious universities queue up, and then employers. You have every chance, every right to have that future." Pete, who of course was already thinking about the future, realized how important it was for him to participate in this competition. It made him anxious and excited. What if he couldn't handle it? "I will prepare you," Laurel Swan continued, as if she had heard the thoughts of her promising student. "You are more worthy of this place than anyone else. We'll study hard. You'll do well." And indeed, Laurel Swan began to study with Pete separately on an accelerated program. The principal was happy about that. If his pupil won a competition of this level, it was a big plus for their orphanage. He allowed Pete and Laurel Swan to take the class after school, and even provided them with everything they needed: a VCR, a laptop, a record player. "It's not enough," Laurel Swan worried. "We have to do it on the weekends too. I'll talk to the principal. Maybe he'll let you come to my house on weekends, because you have a great potential, but you don't have enough base. You have to work hard, and everything will work out." The director said it's okay. Moreover, he even allocated money from the budget of the orphanage for bus fare. Not a huge sum, but still, for the first time in many years, Pete was alone in the city. He waited for the right bus, got on the empty seat. It was so nice to ride through the city like that, looking out the window. Laurel Swan met him at the bus stop. It was a little unusual to see her outside the school office, but it was nice too. Their path wound through the park. They chatted, laughed, joked. Pete suddenly imagined that he was just an ordinary kid. He was no different from the boys around him, was he? And there he is, walking next to his aunt or even his mom. They're talking about something, smiling. It's a typical picture. The people around them don't realize that this is what happiness looks like. For them, it's all routine. It's amazing how complicated life is, Pete thought. "There's my house," Laurel Swan said. Pete looked around at the high-rise buildings. A standard dwelling in a typical yard. He'd lived in one like it with his parents, and he'd go back there to his own apartment. When he turned 18, Laurel Swan's apartment was exactly like his parents', which made it seem familiar. 2 rooms, a small but cozy kitchen. Pete looked around with interest. It was obvious that Laurel Swan was not a rich man. Simple furniture, inexpensive wallpaper. But there was a special atmosphere in these rooms, warm, soft, soothing. It must be nice to live here. Pete knew Laurel Swan had a daughter, Linda, about his age. "I'd love to meet her." Laurel Swan must have raised an interesting person. The boy hoped it would be wonderful to be friends with the teacher's daughter if he could make another friend. There were so few of them in his life, after all. The teacher never talked much about her daughter. They discussed all sorts of things, but not Linda. That was even more interesting. The boy had no idea what she was like. But as soon as Linda entered the apartment, Pete realized that they were unlikely to become friends. Laurel Swan was at that moment explaining to a student at the kitchen table the rules of constructing complex English sentences. A kettle was boiling on the stove, and an apple pie was cooking in the oven. Pete was anticipating a pleasant tea party, and then the door rattled open, and a teenage girl appeared on the doorstep. A daring miniskirt, revealing long, skinny legs with sharp knees, a tight top, thick platform shoes. Her short hair was dyed a strange green color, her large eyes thickly lined with black. Her eyelashes were clumped together from a thick coat of mascara. Pete stared at the girl in surprise. He had imagined Linda quite differently, not a Turgenevian young lady, of course, but not like that either. This Linda reminded him subtly of the aggressive girls from the orphanage. And it wasn't about her appearance. Well, maybe the girl likes this image? She has the right to express herself. The essence was something else: a cold, prickly look, contemptuously compressed lips, deliberately swaggering manner of movement. "Linda, hello." Laurel Swan smiled at her daughter. "This is Pete. I told you about him, remember? He's getting ready for the pageant." "Hi," the boy waved his hand. Linda gave the guest a haughty look and turned to her mother, ignoring the greeting. "Do you have anything to eat?" "I won't be long." Laurel Swan scurried to the refrigerator. "Yes, of course," she said. "I'll eat in my room," Linda said, and left. Pete was embarrassed by the scene. Linda appeared to be an insolent and boorish person. Laurel Swan seemed to be ashamed of her behavior. Soon, loud pop music came from the room. Laurel Swan took a plate of pilaf to her daughter. Pete could hear the teacher trying to get her daughter to turn the music down, as it was impossible to study in such a noisy environment. "It's my house. I do what I want. If he doesn't like it, let him go to his own place," was the rude reply. It didn't last long, though. Linda changed her clothes and found herself at the door again. This time she was wearing ultra-short shorts. "What are you looking at?" she said menacingly to Pete. "Do you like me?" Pete blushed. "Where are you going? When are you coming back?" Laurel Swan became alarmed. She hadn't made a single comment about her daughter's appearance. It would have been useless to do so, apparently. "None of your business," the girl said rudely and slipped out the door. "Well, now we can get on with the class," Laurel Swan smiled sadly. Why? Why is she like that? Pete couldn't help but wonder. After a moment, he realized that such talk could be unpleasant for the teacher. But Laurel Swan sighed sadly and sat down opposite him. "You're a big boy, you understand a lot of things," she said. "I just couldn't cope with raising my daughter. I will teach other children, but myself. A cobbler without boots." Laurel Swan raised Linda alone. She was never married at all. Linda's father was the kind of guy who avoided responsibility. An adventurous individual living the life of an adventurer. And this character once met on the way of a quiet, modest girl who, probably for the first time in her life, went with her friends to a disco. What attracted him to her? Maybe it was the fact that she was different from himself. Exotic, so to speak. Either way, it was not difficult for an experienced man to interest an unsophisticated young person. It wasn't even an affair. They spent about 24 hours together. The young lady was in slight shock at how many events contained in these hours, where she had been, what she had seen. Linda's father knew how to be interesting, knew how to organize exciting leisure time. He tried on different roles and masterfully played them himself, enjoying it. The morning he vaporized, as if he was not there. The girl managed to fall in love with him. She was looking for a mysterious beau for a long time, but he seemed to disappear into the water. Most likely, he was irrepressible. Laurel Swan had a daughter to remember the tumultuous but short-lived affair. "I was even glad then," she said. "For a long time I hoped that he would come back. And here I am with a baby. I thought his heart would be moved. We will live together." Then I realized, of course, that it was all just nonsense. Laurel Swan by that time had already graduated from the Teacher Training Institute and managed to get a job at the local gymnasium. She had to go on maternity leave. Money was tight. Laurel Swan lived with her mother in this very apartment. The old woman's pension was small, and her child allowance seemed even smaller. So Laurel Swan took up tutoring, running around all day in other people's apartments. She pounded hard truths into the heads of mostly neglectful students. Their parents were willing to pay a lot of money to make their children speak English. But the children themselves did not want to learn the language. Laurel Swan had to break through the wall of reluctance, and sometimes even disgust. Not a very pleasant occupation. But it paid good money. Linda was being looked after by her grandmother, and she was the first to notice the warning signs. "Something she is some kind of too capricious. Always she is drawn somewhere," complained the old lady. "She doesn't listen to me at all. I punish her blindly, but she does not care. Today she cut off my favorite sweater with scissors to spite me. Especially still looked at me, waiting for a reaction," continued to complain grandmother. "And then she said, 'I'm sorry, Mom,' well, something like that," Laurel Swan objected tiredly. And only 2.5 years old. What revenge? What disobedience? The child is just learning about the world, that's all. It's normal. Laurel Swan loved it when her daughter would run to the door in the evening. The first thing she did was to look in the bag, looking for something tasty, and always found a chocolate bar, or sweet fruit, or flavored buns. Laurel Swan did her best to please her daughter. Who else would make her happy? No father. Time passed. Linda went to kindergarten, where Laurel Swan returned to grammar school. That's where the trouble started. Now the teachers were complaining about Linda. She hits other kids, encourages the boys to play pranks, spits when she's in the wrong. The woman promised to talk to her daughter to improve the situation, and she did. But with her mother, Linda behaved like a real angel. It seemed that everyone was slandering the poor girl. The grandmother, the teachers. And then Laurel Swan's mother died suddenly, a heart attack, and the woman was left alone with her daughter. It was just about time for Linda to start first grade. But then Laurel Swan herself had to admit there was something wrong with her daughter. Linda categorically refused to learn. The girl was prepared for school at a fee-based center. They didn't talk about the problems there. Why scare clients who are paying good money? It turned out that Linda can neither read, nor write, nor operate even the smallest numbers. And worst of all, she doesn't want to learn those skills. Laurel Swan worked very hard. She practiced with her daughter every day, patiently endured her whims and reproaches. Only threats worked. Read the page, solve the examples, then you can go outside. Otherwise you'll stay home, Linda. The street beckoned to her with a terrible force. Sitting at home in four walls, it was for her like a prison. The girl shouted at her mother, called her names, threw notebooks and textbooks at the wall, and still had to fulfill the requirements of the parent. Then Linda was even weaker than her mother, physically weaker. And then, when she was older, Linda simply pushed Laurel Swan aside and went outside or ran away when she was at work. A woman couldn't guard her daughter 24 hours a day. Sometimes Linda just didn't make it home from school, going straight out to travel the neighborhood in the company of dubious friends. Laurel Swan was worried about her daughter and didn't know what to do. Prohibitions didn't help. In addition, Linda cheated, insulted her mother, took valuables from the house, which it seems then sold. She needed something to entertain herself with. Laurel Swan first smelled cigarettes on 10-year-old Linda. After getting drunk, the teacher's daughter showed up for the first time when she was 13. Laurel Swan talked a lot with her girl, told her how such behavior can turn out, what troubles await teenagers on the street. But Linda only smiled and looked down on her mother as if she were a fool. "What do you know about the free life, about the street?" she used to say. "You've spent your whole life fulfilling other people's wishes and expectations, parents, neighbors, and all that. And I don't care what people say. I was born free. And you're angry about it. I'm not like you." It was the truth. Linda, both in appearance and, most disturbingly, in character, took after the father she had never known or seen. There it was, the monstrous power of genes. The same frivolous adventurer, the same liar and actress, the same rule-breaking adventurer. Laurel Swan fought for her daughter. She still hoped that nurture could overcome genetics. The woman took Linda to psychologists and psychotherapists, tried to become more of a friend, and give the girl more freedom. All in vain. The older Linda got, the more the chasm unfolded between them. It was so unlike Laurel Swan's relationship with her own mother. No warmth of heart, no mutual support, no shared interests. Linda seemed to despise her mother for her dull gray life, her poverty, her intellectualism. This girl herself considered herself an ideal. She could afford to do what she wanted. For example, to send the teacher in the classroom for the fact that she was picking on her appearance, or smoking on the school porch. Gradually, her parents became Linda's servants. Her mother fed her, made her money, gave her a roof over her head. She's necessary, only for this. True, she had to pay, listen to the occasional lecture. But Linda learned long ago to ignore them. Maybe it's just her age, Pete suggested after listening to Laurel Swan. There was so much pain in her eyes that he wanted something to comfort her. "That's what I hope," she replied. "As time passes, Linda will calm down, come to her senses. Think about the future, so long as nothing bad happens to her in the meantime." "I'm so scared for her." "Well, we're getting a little distracted. You need to study. Open your textbook to page 3. Pete came to Laurel Swan's house every Sunday. They studied hard for the pageant. They also drank fragrant tea with delicious homemade pastries and talked about very interesting topics. Laurel Swan tried to answer all of Pete's questions. She didn't dismiss any of them. She was wise, empathetic, and worried. Sometimes Linda was home during these sessions. One day she piled into the hallway, drunk at 15. She reeked of booze, tobacco smoke, and the girl's legs were a mess. It was late morning. It looked like Linda hadn't been home last night. The girl passed out in the hallway. Pete helped the teacher drag her senseless body to the bed. "It's just the way we live," Laurel Swan sighed later. "Nothing works on her. Linda was even worse than the violent girls at the orphanage. Those were toughened by their hard fate and the need to fight for survival. And Linda, why? She has clothes and her own room and delicious food. And most importantly, such a wonderful mom." Once, in Pete's presence, Linda insulted Laurel Swan. She tried to ask her daughter if she would be back for dinner. The girl was irritated about something. She unleashed an angry tirade on her mother, and Pete stood up for Laurel. "But she doesn't deserve to be treated like that," he said. And then something happened that the boy never expected. Linda jumped up and slapped him so hard that his eyes went black. "You're going to tell me what to do in my own house?" she shouted. Linda's eyes burned with evil fire. "You bitch." From then on, Pete thought the girl was crazy sick. "Well, it happens. Not necessarily. People with mental illness look like fools. Some of them are geniuses," he said. "A normal person can't be like that." One day the boy even shared his speculations with his teacher. He was worried before the conversation, afraid to offend Laurel, but she realized that it was just an expression of concern for herself. "No, there's nothing wrong with her mentally. I've had her seen by several psychiatrists since she was a baby. The verdict is clear, everything is within normal limits," Laurel replied. Pete didn't tell anyone about Laurel's daughter. The teacher didn't ask him specifically, but he understood it himself. He only shared it with Irina. They always told each other everything. "Silly Linda doesn't understand her happiness," the girl shook her head. "I wish I had such a mother." Irina felt sorry for the kind teacher. Other children were drawn to Laurel, even the worst bullies. And her own daughter? Closer to the date of the competition, one serious problem came to light. It turned out that the participants had to pay for their own transportation. And this is a lot of money: tickets for the child and the chaperone, a few days of hotel accommodation, meals. "But no, I can't allocate such a sum," the director of the orphanage refused at once. "Where from? We need to fix the roof. And it's fall, and many of the children have outgrown warm clothes." Pete heard Laurel Swan persuading the director of the orphanage, convincing him that Pete's participation in the contest was a chance for a normal life. Then she tried to prove that his win was good for the orphanage. "You're going to get so many sponsors after this. They will fix the roof, buy clothes for the children, and make a sports field," she said. "He still has to win. And where are the guarantees?" objected the director. "He has great potential, no doubt. But I don't believe that our pupil could beat everyone at an event of this level and scale." Pete was catching every word, and everything was tightening inside him. Could it be that because of financial difficulties he would not even go to the competition? It turned out that he had practiced, tried, and hoped for nothing. The boy had a goal, a dream, and now he felt like the ground had been knocked out from under him. "I'll think of something," Laurel Swan promised Pete, who was barely holding back tears. "Don't worry, I'll find the money and we'll go to the pageant. You'll see." Laurel has since begun to pound the doorsteps of the administration. She even appealed to city businessmen, but apparently no one believed in the talents of the boy from the orphanage. No one was interested in the teacher's proposals. Pete saw how hard Laurel was working for him. He was very grateful to her for that. But he'd already accepted the fact that it wasn't going to work out. It was obvious. But one morning before school started, the teacher approached Pete. The boy was usually the earliest to get to class. He liked this quiet time in the morning, standing at the window, looking out at the street while the others bustled about before the next school day. "We're going," Laurel told Pete with shining eyes of joy. "I managed to find the right amount of money." "Where? How?" The boy's heart thumped in his chest like a captured animal. "There are still people who care," the teacher replied evasively. "The world is not without good people." Much later, on the eve of his departure, Pete learned that Laurel, having failed to achieve results, had simply taken out a loan. The payments were exorbitant for her, but she had decided to do it. Pete went to Laurel Swan's house on Sunday as usual. He hoped he wouldn't see Linda today, but she was home. "You should be glad you're going to Washington," the girl measured him with a scornful glance. Your mother took out a loan because of you. She's always been a fool. She's always been a fool. She's always been stupid. Would not have her own daughter to buy brand-name sneakers. But no, she'd rather spend her money on something stupid. She's pissing me off on purpose. Are you here for me? Pete turned to Laurel. She suddenly blushed as if she'd done something embarrassing. She was embarrassed that Pete had found out the truth. Don't think about it, she said. I've been wanting to go to Washington myself for a long time. Anyway, it's such a chance. The principal's going to give me a raise after you win. I'll pay off the loan. It's okay. After that, Pete decided he was going to win. He would win at any cost. He couldn't let Laurel swan down. And the kid won that pageant. Standing on the stage in the spotlight, he felt no excitement. His mind was clear and bright. It was a tough subject. You could say he was unlucky. But Pete did it. He gave such a monologue that the whole hall applauded him for a long time. The results were to be announced the next day. Objectively, you were the best, but it's possible Laurel was worried. You can't rule out Blatt connections. Pete was not among the winners. They announced third place, then second place. Laurel looked hopefully at the stage. Pete, however, was already convinced that it had failed. And then the announcer called out his name. The room erupted in applause. First place. Victory. And then it was all over in a flash. Pete didn't even realize it. He returned to the orphanage, where he was greeted as a winner should be greeted. Esmeralda even cried tears of joy. And Laurel Swan, she was glowing with happiness that everything had worked out. Soon people from the boarding school for gifted children came to pick Pete up. They spent a couple of days taking care of him. Some formal moments preparing documents, studying the boy's personal history. Pete realized that they were taking him somewhere to a new life, which he deserved, according to Laurel Swan. He had a future now. A brilliant future. Pete would become strong, smart, wealthy. He won the lucky ticket thanks to Laurel, of course, and the support of Esmeralda. They're the ones who are very hard to part with. They're the people closest to Pete. Esmeralda's a bit of a worry to leave behind. How's she going to be here without him for another 3 years? Who's going to protect her? Laurel promised to keep an eye on her. Still, it's scary and sad and hard. It would be a long time without seeing her loved ones. On the other hand, it's worth it to be patient for a few years. After all, then Pete will become an influential and wealthy man, will do everything for it. And then he would thank Laurel and make Esmeralda's life a fairy tale. The second point Pete managed to realize, not immediately, of course. First, the boy spent 3 years in a boarding school for gifted children. It was a real palace with a magnificent garden. A separate room, classrooms, equipped with the latest technology. Smart, motivated kids. Pete finally made friends here, local kids. He had a lot of common topics and interests, so friendships formed somehow by themselves. The teachers noticed the smallest abilities of their students and tried to develop them. They were very pleasant and educated people, communication with whom enriched and developed. But Pete had never had such a warm relationship with anyone as he had with Laurel. He often remembered his teacher, worried about whether it was hard for her to pay off the loan, whether Linda was hurting her. After graduating from boarding school, Pete entered the University of Washington without exams. During the years of study, the guy managed to win several Olympiads at the national level, which gave him special preferences. Many boarding school graduates entered prestigious universities in this way, without exams. Scholarship, dormitory, supportive mentors who continued to supervise and accompany students even after graduation. Pete's life became easier, calmer, more interesting. While still a student, he found a job. He was hired by a large tour company as a translator. Pete began to earn good money. That's when he was finally able to return to his hometown. And he was eager to see Laurel and, of course, to find Esmeralda. Finding Esmeralda was no problem. The director of the orphanage gave the address of the apartment, which the girl received after graduation as a round orphan. It was some kind of barrack-type shanty town in the middle of nowhere. Always drunken neighbors, mountains of garbage everywhere. Esmeralda graduated from college and now worked as a dressmaker's assistant in an attire. She made a pittance, lived in a hole. I never thought you'd come back. Esmeralda's eyes shone like two bright stars at the sight of Pete. How grown up are you now? Are you handsome? How could I leave you? Pete smiled, hugging her. I missed you so much. You won't live here anymore. You won't stay a single day in this horrible house. That same evening, Pete helped Esmeralda move into her parents' apartment. It had been empty the whole time. The old neighbors were gone, the older ones had died. The younger ones had moved out. Too bad. It would have been nice to talk to old friends, Pete sighed. But the main thing is that Esmeralda will have a normal life now. I'll feel better. And it's nice to have a loved one living in my own apartment. It makes my soul feel warmer. But Laurel was never found. Her apartment was now occupied by new tenants. The landlady sold it to us 2 years ago, said the woman in a bathrobe who opened the door for Pete. She and her daughter had moved somewhere in the country, I think. I don't know the details. I don't need to know. Pete returned to Washington and continued to study and work. But now every vacation he returned home to Seattle, where Esmeralda was waiting for him. After graduation, Pete was hired by the State Department. The position was offered at once responsible and highly paid. As Laurel Swan had once assumed, winning a prestigious competition became Pete's ticket to life. Now he was being guided and supervised. The boy's life seemed to run on carefully laid rails. Everything seemed to work itself out. Pete bought an apartment in Washington. Esmeralda moved in with him. They got married. Pete was moving up the career ladder. He had to work hard, but it paid off. Esmeralda stayed at home, taking care of the children and the household. She sincerely enjoyed motherhood and loved her husband very much. Pete was pleased and warm to come home from work. The man made several more attempts to find Laurel, but to no avail. Her tracks were lost after moving out of her old apartment. Too bad for Pete. He so wanted to thank her again, so wanted her to see what he had accomplished. All her efforts were not in vain. A good woman deserves to be thanked, and not just verbal gratitude. After a few years, Pete realized that working in the ministry takes too much time and energy. He was missing out on happy and important moments. The son went to the first grade, but the father did not get to the lineup because of an urgent meeting. The daughter performed for the first time with a ballet group in the theater, but busy Pete at this time was conducting important negotiations, and the man decided to go into the restaurant business. When the opportunity to open his own business presented itself, and now Pete has a chain of restaurants in the capital. He's his own boss. Work, of course, you have to work a lot, but the man is able to regulate his own schedule so that everywhere has time. And that's just great. Today he stayed up late with reports, but tomorrow he has a free day to devote to his family. Pete left the office with a feeling of accomplishment. On the street, he smiled at the anticipation of seeing his wife and children. And there's this old woman at the restaurant bins who looks a lot like Laurel Swan. That resemblance is frightening. But the woman at the dumpster certainly can't be Laurel. The teacher has a place to live, and she had a job, which means she has a pension. Hello, Pete. The woman smiled sadly. Is this how you've grown up? Handsome, mature, strong. Just like you always dreamed you'd be. Laurel Swan? Pete asked in disbelief. The woman nodded her head. Pete invited her into his office. On the way, they both expressed their joy at the chance meeting, each in their own way. Laurel smiled warmly and a little embarrassed. Pete was talking excitedly about his life and how long he had been looking for her. Finally, they were in Pete's office. It's nice and cozy here, the man said, and gestured for Laurel to sit down on a comfortable couch in the corner, placed especially for visitors. Then he made coffee for the guest himself, put cookies in a plate for the visitors. Usually Lexi's secretary took care of the guests, but at this late hour, of course, she was at home. Laurel, it's just amazing that we met. I've been thinking about you so much, looking for you for so long. I wanted you to know how much I've achieved thanks to you. Thanks to yourself, the older woman corrected, looking at Pete with pride. Talented, persistent, hardworking. That's what made it all work. You know very well that if it hadn't been for you, I don't know who I'd be now. A good man. You'd still be a good man without me, and you'd still be a success. Maybe not so soon. Of course, kids like you with a backbone, you can tell. You can trust me. I have a lot of experience. But why you? Pete hesitated, searching for words. How did you end up in this position? It's obvious that you need. It's obvious I'm old, Laurel Swan sighed. And speak plainly. It was obvious that she was uncomfortable in front of her former student, ashamed that he could see her in this position. "Tell me," Pete asked. "Okay," Laurel nodded. "It's a long story, and I can't say I'm surprised by the ending. It was coming. After Pete was taken away to a boarding school for gifted children, I started having a lot of trouble with Linda. The 15-year-old girl was now often spending the night with who knows where, showing up home in the morning, or even a few days after she went missing. Sometimes she was brought by the police, whom I asked for help, because the girl was a minor. Exhortations, threats, heart-to-heart talks, everything was bypassed. I even tried to lock my daughter up when I went to work. I couldn't work, I had to live on something. But one day a freedom-loving person cleaned through the balcony, tied the sheets, and went down them from the 4th floor. After that, I stopped locking her up. It's dangerous." The teenager now spoke to her mother only in foul language. All the valuables, jewelry, appliances were missing from the house. Someone even took the washing machine. Linda needed money for booze, for the bars that attracted her so much. She didn't seem to see any other pleasures, although I tried from childhood to instill in her a love of beauty, books, theater, learning new things. In everything that happened to my daughter, I partly blamed her bad company, marginal teenagers from dysfunctional families. They didn't study, they didn't work. Glassy, completely empty eyes, the stamp of limitation on their faces, ungroomed, perpetually gray and ragged. And these people somehow had a great influence on her daughter. Linda was hospitalized several times. Her young body could not withstand such a life. Doctors warned that if the teenager continues in the same vein, the consequences could be fatal. So Laurel decided to take drastic measures to take her daughter to the village. Yes, sell the apartment, buy a house in a remote village, away from civilization. Fresh air, physical labor, breaking old ties. And the change of scenery itself, according to the desperate mother, should have brought Linda to her senses. It was hard to get out of her own way like that, to leave everything behind and sell the apartment. And there was no guarantee that Linda would get better. But I had to try. I had to do something. Laurel sighed. "Did you show her to the doctors?" "Of course. Once I even managed to put her in the clinic, but she ran away from there, and then refused to go to specialists at all. She was happy with everything. She didn't consider herself sick. It's not like she had to be carried around on a horse." Linda was furious when she heard her mother's decision. At first, she refused to go with her to the village, so Laurel went to her new place of residence alone. The woman was at a loss. She had only made the move for her daughter's sake, and Linda had found a way to stay in the city, living with someone from her company. It seemed that Laurel's move had backfired. She herself had pushed her daughter closer to those she had tried to keep her away from. But then Linda was back, angry, thin, wrinkled. She was quickly turning on those she so loved to spend time with. Apparently, she lived with one of her friends, but the cramped overcrowding, the lack of money, the constant yelling and fighting, such conditions did not suit her. And she had to live on something. So Linda gritted her teeth and returned to her mother. At least she would always feed and provide a clean bed. Laurel Swan was a little relieved. Maybe her plan would work after all. Maybe Linda would come to her senses here. Nothing of the sort. Soon Linda's old friends began to visit the village. Sometimes the girl herself went to the city. 150 kilometers was not such an insurmountable obstacle. Leisure activities continued. Moreover, sociable Linda, and in the village, found a similar company. There was one overgrown, garbage-strewn house with a leaky roof. In it lived a woman with 5 small children from different fathers. Maybe the lady herself did not know who her children were from, as she was almost always drunk. In this house there were endless parties, in which Linda took part with pleasure. And then one day Laurel noticed that her daughter had a rounded belly. Linda, it turned out, was expecting a baby. Yes, she shrugged her sharp shoulders when her mother shared her suspicions with her. "What's the big deal?" "I'm 18 years old. I have the right." "Who's the father?" Laurel asked. "Was he one of our village fathers?" "I'm a townie, but honestly I don't remember his name very well. We met at the club. To be honest, I can hardly even remember what he looked like. Well, it's just like you used to be. Doesn't it remind you of anything?" Laurel clutched at her heart, and Linda smiled happily. She always liked to shock her mother. Even when she was pregnant, Linda was still living her usual lifestyle, drinking, smoking, disappearing to the city, and then to the village house. Her mother's request to stop drinking did not touch her. It seems that she was absolutely indifferent to the fate of her own child. "None of your business." That's all Laurel heard in response to her exhortations. Laurel's grandson was born well before his due date. He was so tiny, so weak. Linda was wheeled into the birthing center right off the street since she was just in town. The contractions curled her up in front of the store. The baby was born weak and sickly and was left in the hospital. Linda was discharged alone. With her coveted freedom, she plunged headlong into her old life. Laurel Swan went to see Willie and talked to the doctors. The baby wasn't doing well. Linda's lifestyle during pregnancy had not gone unnoticed. Underdeveloped many organs and systems, heart defect, brain damage. Doctors made it clear that if the baby survived, he would remain profoundly disabled, needing care for life. But life was unlikely to be long either. Doctors unanimously advised to give up the crumb. But how? How could one abandon this touching pale baby with expressive eyes? He already recognized Laurel, looked at her, tried to smile at his grandmother. True, Linda for some time was determined to give up her son. What do I need him for? An invalid. All the more I will still give birth to another healthy. It's horrible. Laurel tried to get through to her daughter. He's a human being. What will he be like in an orphanage? And then Linda had a sudden change of heart. She said that of course she would take Willie home. As it turned out later, a friend with many children convinced the young mother. The children are entitled to benefits. There are even more for the disabled. That's all it was. Willie was discharged. The arrival of the child did not affect Linda's lifestyle. With a light heart, she was free to go home and sleep in a normal environment. Willie was on welfare, so Linda was now walking around with her own source of income. She became even more popular in certain circles. Seeing this, Laurel didn't even try to reason with her daughter. She realized it was useless. Such was the irresistible power of genes. Laurel didn't blame herself for what had happened to Linda. She knew she had given her daughter enough time and done everything she could to raise her to be a decent person. Now Laurel Swan was taking care of Willie, treating him, developing him, traveling with the baby to doctors. Of course, people, including doctors, wondered where the child's mother was, why his upbringing was being taken care of by his grandmother. Laurel lied to everyone, saying that her daughter was working so that her son would have everything he needed. And she, the grandmother, was only helping the young mother of a disabled child. No, Laurel was not ashamed of her daughter's behavior. She hadn't been afraid of people's judgment for a long time. She was afraid of something else. Linda could be deprived of parental rights, and Willie will go to boarding school. It is unlikely that he will be left to his grandmother. Neither the conditions in their house are not so good, nor the age for guardianship is already old enough, and the income is meager. So Laurel got by, giving birth to her grandson as best she could. And then Linda brought home her husband, a grown man with red, cloudy eyes from constant drinking, and announced that he would now live here. Laurel thought it couldn't get any worse and harder for her. But it turned out she was wrong. This Adrian made her existence a living hell. He immediately felt like the owner of someone else's house. Adrian emptied the refrigerator without a care in the world. He didn't care if Laurel used the last of her money to buy fruit or milk for Willie. The man never cleaned up after himself, swearing loudly at Linda and Laurel if something was out of place. Sometimes he even got handsy. And now they had a bunch of Adrian's buddies over to their house. It was unbearable. All night long, the youths were buzzing in the kitchen. Mats, loud laughter, swearing, cigarette smoke all over the house, glasses clinking. Sometimes even fights broke out. Willie was restless in his sleep. Laurel sat next to him. She couldn't sleep. There was no telling what might happen, a fire or something. No, one had to stay alert. Linda was quite happy with this existence. She defended Adrian to her mother, as if she didn't notice her husband's rough treatment of both of them. I couldn't leave. How could I leave Willie with them? Grandmother waved a jinx at the sudden return of her tears. My grandson loved me. I was his only hope, and for his sake I put up with all this. I would have run away a long time ago. In fact, that's what I did when Willie. From the very beginning, The disabled boy was expected to live a short life, but grandmother hoped for a medical error and the power of modern medicine. At first, the kid seemed to be doing well, but then the disease took its toll. Every day the boy grew weaker, thinner, became indifferent to what was happening. Nothing pleased him. His grandmother went to the hospital with him. At first they lay in the ward together, then the child was transferred to the intensive care unit. That was it. The grandmother sobbed for several days when the doctors told her the terrible news. The daughter and her roommate were saddened only by the fact that they lost their source of income. Well, one more, the daughter shrugged. It's a simple matter, the man smirked. The grandmother, listening to this dialogue, realized no, she couldn't stay in the same house with her daughter for another minute. This is some kind of alien, scary, heartless creature. Here I packed my things and ran away here to Moscow. My pension is quite meager. My daughter took out loans in my name, and now the bailiffs are deducting them from my pension. I get pennies, but nothing. Time is passing. I'll pay it off soon. I sleep in a hostel. I don't have my own place. But it's better than enduring the antics of my daughter and her roommate. I don't always have enough to eat, so I do it at night near restaurants and cafes. You don't have the security guards like other places. That's why I come here a lot. I didn't even know you owned this place. So, life has turned around. The restaurant owner shook his head. What he had heard did not fit in his head. This kind, caring woman, a talented teacher, and lives like this. Collects food almost on the garbage dump. My heart squeezed with pity for this bright person. The teacher did not deserve such a fate. But now everything will change. To believe or not to believe, he began suddenly. But I've been looking for you. I've been looking for you for a long time, just to thank you. And now I've found you. You'll have your own apartment now. Cozy, clean, just like it used to be. If your pension isn't enough to live on, you'll work part-time as a tutor. You're a great teacher. You love your work. And people need your knowledge. I have friends whose school children need extra lessons. They will be only happy to such a tutor like you. And the pay will be good, don't even doubt it. I hate to put you to such a strain, the woman replied. Consider it a debt I'm repaying. It must have been hard for you to pay off that loan you took out to send me to the contest. And this help cost me nothing now. I'm glad. I also need you to meet my children. And you know my wife, she will be very glad to see you. The teacher smiled as she looked at her former student. Yes, I'm looking forward to seeing your and Irina's children too. I'm so happy for you.